The cowboy rode home for his mother's funeral and found a reason to live again. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from today? And once the story is over, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now, settle in and enjoy the story. The wind howled across the prairie like the long cry of a desert flute. The horizon burned red, stretching shadows over the weather-faded Harris Ranch. Gabriel stood on the wooden porch, the click of his spurs tapping once against the boards. His hand, still dusty from the road, rested near the worn stock of his revolver. Out by the fence line, a lone rider had stopped, hat pulled low, his horse still beneath him as he watched. Down in the yard, Gabriel's old shepherd suddenly began digging wildly at the corner of the abandoned garden, dirt flying like a shower of sparks. Then she froze, pulling up a small oilcloth bundle, frayed and torn with age. Gabriel knelt. Slowly, he unwrapped the cloth. There, catching the last firelight of the sunset, lay his mother's silver rosary. A chill ran down his spine. The sharp scent of pine smoke drifted in on the wind. His spurs echoed once more, and at the edge of the fence, the shadowed rider turned his horse away. Gabriel gripped the rosary tight. "Ma!" His voice broke low and rough. "I'm home." That night, what had been buried was not just a keepsake. It was the door that cracked open his heart again. Copper Creek, Colorado. Autumn, 1878. The main street lay under a thin film of red dust. Desert wind whistled through the cracks of weathered boards, while the distant whistle of a train drifted from the brand new depot. The saloon spilled golden light onto the road, its doors swinging in the breeze like an old hand beckoning. Fresh signs hung high above, but the smells were the same as 8 years ago: sawdust, wood smoke, and the sweat of horses. Gabriel Harris, 30 years old, now a cowboy who had drifted from one ranch to the next, reined in his tired horse before the general store. His boots were caked in trail dust, his wide-brimmed hat drawn low to hide eyes hardened by miles of wind and regret. And yet in the corners of those eyes lingered a softness, an old weariness, and sorrow. He had left Copper Creek in a blaze of youthful anger. Now he returned too late. His mother was already gone. Gabriel's steps creaked slow across the porch boards of the old house. Calloused fingers brushed the doorframe, the rocking chair, where his mother once sat the broken corner of the fence. The house still stood, but the breath of family was gone. And for one long, aching moment, Gabriel felt like a lost boy again. Alone in the wide west. His heart tightened as his mother's words returned from those old letters, tolling soft like a church bell carried by the wind sun. Come home before it's too late. But he had come too late. Part 1. The invitation to stay. The late autumn wind drifted across the prairie, carrying the scent of dry earth and resin from the pines. On the faded porch, Gabriel's spurs gave a quiet tack as he stepped out, his sun-browned hand brushing near the grip of his revolver, a habit carved deep by years spent where nothing was promised but danger. His dog Buddy lifted her head, ears pricked at the sound of hooves. From the dirt road, a small buggy rolled into the yard, the horse's breath rising pale in the chill wheels, grinding red dust into ribbons. A woman reined in, bringing the buggy to rest beside the sagging fence. She wore a simple deep blue dress, a light brown shawl, her chestnut hair tied neat at the nape. In her arms, She carried a wicker basket wrapped in cloth. She raised her face, hazel eyes calm, like the first stillness of a winter river. "You must be Gabriel Harris." Her voice was low smooth, neither timid nor abrupt. Gabriel nodded, just nodded. 8 years on the trail had stripped him of greetings that felt needless. Buddy circled her feet, tail wagging in that cautious welcome, reserved for folks who carried no cheap whiskey on their breath and no ill intent in their step. "I'm Ruby Wilson," she said, "Dr. Wilson's daughter. My father asked me to bring food. You came home on a hard day." Hard. The word fell neat and heavy, like the lid of a coffin. Gabriel shifted his weight, the spur chiming again like a needle against porcelain. "Thank you," he said at last. "You didn't have to." "I did." Ruby's gaze held steady. "Some things in Copper Creek haven't changed. We bring supper to the one who's buried their kin." She set the basket on the porch. From within rose the fragrance of beef stew, warm bread, and a trace of cinnamon apple, softening the emptiness inside the cabin by a step. "Won't you?" She tilted her head toward the door, the gesture light, but firm, as if opening a gate only he could cross. Gabriel hesitated. The house had been motherless 3 days now, the ashes in the stove still those of her last fire. His eyes flicked to the bare patch of ground where Buddy had unearthed the silver rosary that afternoon. His chest tightened. Ruby waited unhurried, her low-heeled shoes dusted with the same red dirt as everyone who belonged to this town. "All right," Gabriel murmured, pushing the door open with its tired groan. "Come in." And with that plain invitation, he led a meal into the house, perhaps even let someone into his grief. Inside, the stove glowed with 3 short logs. Firelight rippled along the pine walls, stretching their shadows like memory drawn long. Ruby set the pot on the grate, unwrapped the bread still warm. Steam rose generously scented with onion sage and black pepper, filling the silence with a kind of mercy. "I'll make coffee," she said, already finding the kettle on the shelf, as though she'd been here before. Soon the dark aroma rose strong and bitter, the kind that steadies a man after too many nights awake. Gabriel hung his hat on a nail-washed trail dust from his hands in the basin. The shock of cold water pulled him back from the haze between day and night. He drew up a chair to the table, his mother's table, where she once mended shirts, read scripture, and set bowls in line with her prayers. Ruby ladled the stew, the meat falling soft carrots glowing in the rich broth. They ate in a silence that was not a wall, but a blanket warm over shoulders, still trembling. "I knew your mother," Elizabeth, Ruby said at last, setting her spoon aside. "She taught me to bake apple pie, told me not to fear sticky dough, said life's the same, if you fear the mess, you'll never shape anything worth keeping." Her smile flickered fragile as firelight. "I lost my husband at 23. The fever took him in 10 days. I came to Copper Creek 3 years later. If not for your mother..." Gabriel drew in a breath, pine smoke tugging at memory. "The telegram reached me 3 days late," he said, his voice worn thin as the faraway rails. "I wandered, telling myself I was searching. Truth is, I was running. I left after a fight with my father. He died of pneumonia before I could make it right. And mother?" She waited. Ruby poured black coffee into a chipped cup, slid it across to him. Her words were quiet, steady. "No one catches up to everything in this life. I'm a nurse. Believe me, There are things beyond our reach. Those left behind carry the blame for sickness and time. But love doesn't keep the books like that. Your mother forgave you long ago. She even forgave the days you haven't lived yet. The whistle of a train rolled through the night, long and low, as if the wide world agreed. Gabriel gripped the cup heat pressing into his calloused palm. Somewhere inside, a knot began to loosen, slow but true. After the meal, Ruby gathered the dishes, but Gabriel took them. "Let me," he said. "I owe this kitchen a clean slate." She studied him a moment, then nodded. As he washed, Ruby moved quietly about the room, fingertips brushing shelves, worn book spines, the faded frame of an old picture, her gaze offering small reverence to what remained. She paused at a ragged curtain, drew needle and thread from her pocket, and sat sewing firm stitches, blowing lightly across the thread to keep it straight. Gabriel glanced over, then bent to fix the wobbling table leg hammer striking a slow rhythm. Buddy's settled chin, resting on his master's hat as though guarding a vow. Firelight deepened to honey wind pressed at the corners, and the faraway train beat in time with the town's heart. Together, they were patching a night that had been torn. On the night Jeremy died, Ruby said suddenly, her needle gleaming in firelight, "I counted his breaths down to none. I wasn't afraid of the body. I was afraid of the emptiness that followed the extra chair, the missing hat. I left Chicago because of those emptinesses. They chased me like a tide without shore. Your mother chased after me instead, made me cook, visit the sick laugh before sorrow robbed my taste." Gabriel laid down the hammer, sat at the table's edge. His thumb traced the faint carving E and G, Elizabeth and Gabriel, etched by a boy of 12 with a pocket knife. "I thought only the long road could save me," he murmured. "But maybe it's the short road that saves." His lips trembled, like a man who's crossed a desert and just tasted water. Ruby tucked away her needle and placed her hand not on the wound, but beside it. Her warm fingers brushed the back of his hand, light as ash leaving fire. "You're not alone," she said, each word like a seed. "Even if silence is what you're used to, you're not alone." And deep within the house, the floorboards seemed to sigh softer. Later they sat on the porch. Night hung heavy stars nailed bright to the sky, and a coyote's cry cut sharp like a violin string. Wind from the pines carried the smoke of neighbors' hearths, the musk of saddles drying the cool breath of damp earth. Ruby pulled her shawl tighter, eyes resting on the gate with its loose latch. "Your mother waited here," she said gently. Rocked until her hands were stiff with cold, but wouldn't go inside. "She told me, he'll come back. Sons are like wild horses. Give them grass on the edge of the sky, and they'll follow the scent home." Gabriel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hat lying open at his boots, like an empty bowl. "For years, I trusted only my own two legs. Then came that telegram, and legs couldn't save a thing." From his pocket, he drew the silver rosary moonlight pooling across its scarred surface. "Buddy found it today. Maybe Ma meant me to." Ruby didn't nod, nor argue, only received the truth. Folks are often too afraid to name that destiny runs underground. "I thought I'd stop believing after that night," she said. "But there's a quiet goodness in the earth and people in a dog that sniffs out the right patch of soil in a letter left where even the blind could find it." Her eyes turned to him steady. If you stay my father, and I will pass here often. We'll bring broth when you're ill thread, when curtains tear coffee when the snow sets in. And you could carry wood for the Gonzaleses fix Mrs. Lawson's door. In Copper Creek, we hold one another that way. Hold one another. The word sank like a wedge of wood, fixing an old hinge at last. Gabriel opened his mouth, closed it, then opened again. Are you asking me to stay? His own voice sounded foreign, at least tonight. Ruby's smile flickered like fire through lashes. Tonight for sure. And if tomorrow you're still on this porch when I bring bread, then we'll see about the day after. Buddy shifted, laying his head squarely on Gabriel's hat, as if sealing the promise with a dog's simple creed, where the hat rests the master has chosen to remain. Ruby returned to the stove lifting a sack of flour. I brought pie crust, but not enough time to bake. If you don't mind, I'll borrow your table. Her tone was matter of fact, as if asking for a spool of thread, not the keys to his night. Your mother always said, apple pie right after a funeral helps folks remember properly, sweet to balance bitter. Flour dusted the board. Ruby kneaded rolled crimped 4 motions like quiet prayers. Gabriel peeled apples with his pocket knife, cinnamon and butter melting together. They baked. They spoke little. When the crust turned golden and bubbled brown at the edges, Ruby set it on the table carved E and G. They shared the first slice with the one not present. No names spoken. The fire dwindled. The train groaned once more, then hushed like a journey finished. Tomorrow, Ruby said, brushing flour from her hands, I'll be in town early. You'll need nails boards, maybe new stirrup leathers. By noon if you'd like. She hesitated, hazel eyes glinting as though seeking permission from someone behind him. You could join us for soup. My father talks too much, but kindly. He owes your mother more than I can say. Gabriel rose, slowly, like a man relearning how to stand still. He lifted the rosary, hung it on the nail above the door. A simple act, but one that returned the heart of the house to the heart it had lost. Thank you, he said quietly, for supper, and for not turning away when all you saw was the wreck of a man who just buried his mother. Ruby's shrug was soft. I turned away the night Jeremy died. Learned my lesson. Don't leave when someone's sinking. She stepped to the doorway, pausing as the room behind them glowed warmer than before. Stay, Gabriel, she said again, no louder than before. Even if only for one night. Grief needs a roof this very evening. The door closed. Buddy slid into the spot she'd left, sighing like an old man sealing a well-written will. On the porch, the wind grew gentler, the scent of pie lingering like a bedtime blessing. Gabriel blew out 2 of the 3 lamps, leaving one to guard the house. He pulled a chair near the stove, sitting beneath the wall where his mother once rested her head. And somewhere deep inside, where sand had long piled, one drop of water fell. Not loud, but enough to open. He didn't pray aloud. He simply spoke to the woman who had once taught him to tie reins with the melody of an old lullaby. The wind shifted softer as though a door had been closed against the cold. And in a night, once hollow, a house was filled again. Tomorrow, perhaps, he would mend fences, led the horse to water knock 3 times on the Wilsons' white-painted door. But tonight, just tonight, he did the hardest thing a wanderer can do. He stayed. Where the hat hangs on a nail, where silver catches firelight, where the scent of apple pie drifts across a pillow, their folks call it home. Part 2. Healing from Sorrow. Dawn opened, like a thin wool blanket laid over the prairie. The early wind carried the smell of damp earth saddle leather dried overnight, and a trace of pine smoke lingering from a late fire. Gabriel poured thick black coffee and took a sip, the bitterness scraping his throat like a promise to get on with the day. He pulled on his gloves, shrugged into his heavy coat, then shouldered a hammer, a box of nails, and a coil of number 9 wire into the yard. Along the east fence, 3 rails had fallen, posts were loose. The wire was rusted like sentences left unsaid between him and his mother. Buggy wheels clattered to a stop at the gate. Ruby climbed down brown shawl, deep blue dress, chestnut hair tied neat. A canvas satchel rode one shoulder, and in her hands was a long wooden box. "My father sent these," she said, setting the box on the step. "New gloves, bandages, leather needles, and a little cornbread." She glanced at the broken fence. "If you'll accept help, I'll accept being the assistant." With that, she pulled on her gloves, no waiting for praise. Buddy barked twice as if approving the arrangement. Gabriel nodded short and clean, and together they hauled the waterlogged rail from the mud. Wet wood, cold ground, stinging palms, and the briny sting of sweat rising at his collar. He measured the span Ruby held, the post. Gabriel lifted the hammer. "Mind your fingers." "I brought a whole box of bandages," she answered even. The hammer dropped in steady time nail heads, ticking into wood like a seamstress's needle. Fresh pitch bled from the grain. Wire pulled taut with a bright twang. They worked by the prairie's rhythm sun, inching up shadows drawing in, and the fence slowly standing straight. By noon, Ruby drew cornbread, salted butter, and a warm canteen from her bag. They sat on the new rail, looking out at fields opening like a door in the heart. "The day I left Chicago," Ruby said, "I nailed the door of my rented room shut. Every blow felt like driving a nail into my own chest. In Copper Creek, I'm learning to hammer for building up." She offered a hand where a sliver had pricked the skin. Gabriel took it, pinched the splinter free with the tip of his pocket knife. His callous thumb grazed the soft skin at her wrist, only a brush, but enough to nudge open a quiet door inside him. "You don't have to be strong all the time," Gabriel said softly, eyes on the horizon. "No one can." Ruby's mouth tilted half smile, half weariness. "I know. But some days strength is the only way to walk through the market without collapsing in the aisle." Smoke of burned grass drifted on the breeze. A train horn sighed through the valley like a voice calling from another life. Gabriel slid the knife back, wiping the blade on his trouser cuff. "Fence will be done by evening. Tomorrow, the roof." The day after the barn, Ruby added, not asking permission. The days began to thread together like a small litany murmured low over the open land. And there labor spoke for the words people are often afraid to say stay. Afternoon turned honey gold close to setting. Gabriel set a ladder, clamped planed boards under one arm, tar bucket, and nails in hand. Ruby, in her own wide-brimmed hat, ran a rope over the ridge beam, checked the slip knot like someone who'd pulled more than one soul back from an edge. "Wind will shift before late afternoon," she said. "You should go up first." "I'm heavier," he replied. "The rope will hold," she reminded him. "Don't look at the nail hole, watch the board's edge." Elizabeth's words, borrowed by Ruby, returning to the right owner. The roof was dry and gray, a few shingles lifting like peeled bark. Gabriel dropped to one knee, set aboard drove, nails sweat cutting across his cheekbone. Below, Ruby braced the ladder. Past nails tended the rope and the angles. Wind hissed along the ridge, carrying the bite of tar, the resin of pine, the scent of a coat that had dried by night. Then a plank slid quick as a fish slipping a hand. Gabriel lunged by instinct, the toe of his boot skidding on a film of moss, his body pitched toward the edge. The rope snapped tight, thwip biting across his waist. Ruby had seized the line before he could call her name. Hold, she said, not loud, but hard as a driven nail. The world froze into particulars, wind roaring Tar's sharp tang, the line burning his ribs, Ruby's hot grip on the rope. Gabriel gulped air, head swimming as if surfacing from a heavy dream. Don't look down, Ruby said. Look at me. He looked. Hazel eyes anchored him there on the eve, a mooring heavier than sense. Good. She lowered her voice. One more breath. Pull yourself in. They counted together. 1, wind sheared. 2, the rope inched. 3, he rolled to safety and lay back, exhaling cold sweat, slicking his spine. Ruby climbed halfway up, knelt beside him, past the canteen. Was anyone home? When you fell, it wasn't really a question. Gabriel pressed his lips thin. My father fell to his lungs. I wasn't in time. Sunlight slid across his cheek, laying bare the years' carved lines. And mother, she pulled you in, Ruby said. With a rope longer than we think. She retied the knot and tossed the line over the beam, her hands steady. They went back to the pulse of board, nail, and tar. Each piece set like an apology, finally placed where it belonged. The wind eased clouds, thinned, resin ripened under the day's last light. When the final plank was fast, Gabriel sat on the roof's edge, legs swinging above the open air. Before him, the mended roof lay like a back freshly stitched. I'll keep this house, he said, as simply as men of the West keep faith with the land. Ruby didn't clap or praise. She stowed the hammer, stacked the leftover boards, and reached to wipe a smear of tar at his temple. Keep the roof, keep yourself, she said. The light faded slow. Somewhere a train horn held a single even note and fell quiet. This quiet wasn't a hollow. It was shelter. Next morning, they swung open the old barn doors. Straw dust leapt like sparrows. The smells of hoarse old sweat and weathered wood braided together the past, mingling with what the day demanded. Gabriel brought a shovel. Ruby heaved the windows wide, and the pine wind poured in. Buddy nosed under a dry heap and tugged out a collapsed leather hat. His Gabriel whispered thumb, tracing the brim, as if following the curve of a vanished voice. They mucked out stalls, laid fresh bedding, scrubbed the troughs, shovel skimming the floor, in rhythm water, slapping wood in little waves. In a dark corner, a low, black-brown chest crouched beneath a beam. Ruby knelt, slid the iron pin free. Inside, a horsebrush. Old Cinch straps a notebook, scribbled full, a rough-carved wooden horse, and a note folded in quarters. She handed it to him. Elizabeth's hand shook on the page, but the words were clear. Son, if you come home one day, know your father forgave you. Let your hands do the rest. Gabriel stood still, broad shoulders, hitching as if someone had set on them a line he hadn't managed to say. He placed the wooden horse on the sill. Sunlight struck the little neck, the head notched where a corner had broken, imperfect, but more than enough to name. Horses understand us better than people do. Ruby murmured, turning the wooden horse toward the yard. And sometimes they lead us out of the holes we dig for ourselves. In the next stall, a mare stood tucked away, left foreleg tender. Gabriel came close, lifted the hoof, checked it. "Splinter," he said. Ruby snapped open her medical kit tweezers, alcohol bandage thin blade. "I'll assist," she said. He steadied the head, drumming a slow beat along the crest, whispering the few words, "Horses trust easy girl." Ruby drew the sliver free, a bead of blood rising. She washed it with alcohol and wrapped it neat. The mare shivered, once set the hoof down, and stood surer. She turned her head and breathed a warm gust into Gabriel's palm. He laughed softly, a laugh strange to his mouth, like an old fiddle someone had just tuned. The day Jeremy died, Ruby said, tucking away the gauze, "I couldn't cry at the coffin. I sharpened knives, stitched straps, washed kettles. Folks called me cold. Truth was, it was the only way I didn't shatter." She looked up dry-eyed, but not hard. Work before the heart remembers it's broken. Gabriel nodded. They kept at it, scrubbing the troughs, rehanging the dragging door, tying on a fresh length of rope. By noon, they'd raised a rack for saddles and stitched a torn strap. Leonardo Gabriel's horse flicked his ears at the click of needle through leather, chewing in quiet contentment. The needle kept its psalm-torn mend, ripped stitch, lost keep. By evening, the barn was clean. Horses calm, the chest latched, yet another door inside Gabriel had opened and would not close again. That afternoon, they rode toward the south fence line. The sky gathered cloud, as if someone had poured gray ink over the valley's lid. The air changed scent, metallic damp, and swollen with wind. "Storm," Gabriel said. Ruby's gaze cut to the mountain's foot. "We need that corner tied before the rain." They urged the horses to a brisk trot, hooves knocking the dry stones clop-clop like knuckles on a door. At the corner, a length of wire had been pulled loose by cattle wrapped around a post into a great fish hook. A sharp bleat ripped the wind. In the tall grass, a calf had its neck trapped in the loop eyes, rolling white. Ruby hit the ground before Gabriel could check his reins. "Wait," he called. "It'll panic." "I need 2 minutes," she answered, already slinging off her bag and sliding into the grass. Wind whipped her skirt like a white flag. Gabriel dropped down, took the calf's head, and blindfolded it with his bandana. "Easy, kid. Breathe with me." The calf's breath was hot and frightened sour with milk and bruised grass. Ruby slid the cutters under the loop and squeezed. Once no give, twice sparks. Third wire snapped. The calf bucked. Ruby pitched sideways. Gabriel caught her in, and both toppled back into the grass as the rain came all at once like the sky exhaling relief. The calf staggered, then shot toward its mother at the tree line. Cow and calf calls overlapped, a short song ending true. Ruby lay back, rain washing her face, chestnut hair plastered to her brow, eyes wide at the storm, like someone who just lost and won at once. Gabriel leaned over to shield her, brushing the wet hair from her eyes. "You're crazy," he said, laughter in his voice. "I studied 10 years," she panted, "to do crazy-looking things in 2 minutes." He laughed, thunder breaking over the ridge like a drum. They crouched under a tarp, rain rattling hard, the smell of living earth rising like stew at a boil. Ruby folded her arms around her knees and trembled a little, not from cold. "I hate thunder," she confessed. "It sounds like the ER doors slamming." Gabriel's hand tightened easy over her shoulder. not to silence the storm, but to lend his body as a wall. "It's only the sky talking," he said. "This door doesn't lock." Rain softened clouds tore, and to the west a thin blade of sunset showed. They tightened the corner brace in the leftover light wire, drawn straight posts, holding firm. "Done." Ruby breathed hands, muddy mouth, smiling. "Tomorrow," Gabriel said, "we paint the barn door." And he met her eyes, slow and true. "I'll take you to Miller's Creek. The aspens shimmer finest at late fall." She nodded her eyes, smiling back. Between those two nods, something small but durable stood up and introduced itself without words trust. Night found the cabin fire crackling again. Beef soup, garlic, and dill mingled with the smell of rain-wet coats. The wind outside had gentled to whispers instead of groans. Ruby sat at the table, needle in hand, mending Gabriel's glove, the long split at the forefinger. "Your mother taught me to mend," she said. "Gloves aren't like curtains, never skimp the thread. Skimping it breaks right where you need the grip." Across from her, Gabriel drew his pocket knife over a whetstone, each stroke a long, even breath. On the wall, the silver rosary caught the firelight, warming the last bead of rain clinging there. Gabriel told how, as a boy, he'd sliced his hand fooling with a blade, and Elizabeth made him sing to chase the fear. He chuckled rough-voiced and sang half a verse. Ruby looked up. "Finish it." He did plain not pretty for a hall, but true for a heart that had found its way back through the throat. Ruby told her piece, too. The night Jeremy burned with fever, she tried a lullaby, the only song she knew about a train leaving a station, and he smiled in his sleep. "I thought I'd never sing again," she said. "Now, maybe." She tied off the thread and handed him the mended glove. "Tomorrow it won't bite your finger." Gabriel opened an old wooden chest and took out a worn sleigh bell. "My father hung this at the door. When the wind passed, it rang. He said, 'A house with a bell is a house where people still wait for one another.' He offered it to Ruby. 'Hang it for me.' She stood on a chair, turned a screw, and fixed the bell to the doorframe. A slip of breeze crossed the threshold. The bell chimed 2 short notes, clear and tight like laughter breaking through tears. They listened longer than they needed to. "Thank you for today," Gabriel said. "For the rope, the rain, the calf, the bell." Ruby tipped a shoulder. "For nails, boards, and roof." She slipped on her coat and lifted her hat. "I'll come early with paint and the rest of the pie." She paused in the doorway, fingertips touching the frame, a touch like a stamp. "Gabriel, yeah, work," she said as a prayer for people who don't know what to say. Her smile was the quiet kind. "Today we prayed enough for a house." The door closed. Buddy shifted and laid his head across Gabriel's boots. Outside, the wind lifted the bell for one long note. Gabriel turned down the lamps and left a small one burning. He slid a chair close to the stove, settling his back against the wall where his mother had rested hers night after night. On the table, the little wooden horse faced the door. On the wall, the silver rosary glinted. On the frame, the sleigh bell waited for wind. He set the newly mended gloves on the table as a man might set down a heart-stitched right. And before sleep took him, words slipped out, he wasn't sure to whom. The land, the wind, the woman who had just left the mother, who was gone tomorrow. I'll keep going. Out there, the prairie breathed. The mended roof lay quiet. The fence stood true. The barn smelled clean. No blazing miracle. Only 2 people and a dog. A long day of hammer and needle sweat and rain. 1 calf freed from wire and a roof that no longer leaked. In the West, sometimes that's all it takes to pull a soul back from the edge. And in this house tonight, labor did what it's done since the first hands met the earth it healed. Part 3. A different kind of first morning. The sleigh bell at the doorframe chimed softly, as if someone had knocked 3 times on the edge of dawn. Autumn wind slipped along the newly mended roof, carrying the scents of wet grass and last night's pine smoke. Gabriel's eyes opened when the first blade of light drew a thin line across the plank wall and slid up the silver rosary, its bright bead dancing like a gentle question mark. Buddy rose. First shook her ears, then set her chin on the mattress edge as if to remind him it's time to live. Gabriel sat up soles, finding the cool wood so real it felt as if grief itself took a step back. He laid the fire paper, kindling 2 dry splits. The flame caught with a crisp tick-tick, prouder than spurs tapping on a saloon floor. The coffee pot went on. The bitter, deep, warm smell opened the house wide. He washed in cold well water and studied his reflection in the tin basin, sun-browned face eyes, anchored in the here and now, a wide-brim hat hanging straight on its nail, waiting for a man who wouldn't wear it just to ride away again. He carried his cup to the table, carved E and G, looked at the boyhood knife marks, and his lips moved. "Good morning, Ma." The words came as naturally as breath, not a ritual. A habit returned. His calloused hand touched the small wooden horse on the windowsill. "Let your hands do the rest." Her line from the note he'd found in the barn chest yesterday climbed out of memory and settled warm against his heart. He pulled on his dusted boots, buckled his spurs, shrugged into his coat. Buddy trotted ahead, her tail sweeping the last beads of dew off the porch boards. Outside, the sun climbed over the rise yellow as melting butter. The barn was quiet. The new roof didn't complain. The east fence stood true, and the south corner, where they'd cut the snare wire yesterday, held fast with new ties. Gabriel set his cup on the step and, out of old habit, brushed a fingertip near the revolver's grip, then left it there. Today, the enemy wasn't on the trail. What he faced were the daily chores abandoned for 8 years. He gathered a bucket curry brush, saddle oil nippers, nails, hoof knife tools falling into his palms like muscle memory had been waiting for him to return and lift the lid. The sleigh bell rang, one clean note, as he passed the door, a simple sound that named this morning begin. At the barn threshold, he paused, half a heartbeat, lungs filling like cloth to a cool breeze. "I'm not running today." He didn't say it out loud, but Buddy heard it with her tail, and the sky heard it with a widening patch of blue. He slid the doors open. Leonardo tossed his forelock. The mare, with the tender left leg, pawed lightly at the dry straw. The woven scents of old sweat-damp straw and sun-dried leather rose together so familiar it ached like hearing your own name after too long. Gabriel hung the bucket on a peg, drew the curry comb, and worked in slow circles until dust leapt in little clouds. Leonardo bumped his shoulder, warm breath on his neck, a proper greeting from creatures who keep their word without words. He switched to a soft brush, smoothing with the lay of the hair. Under his hands, The horse's muscles came up like the map of a country being colored back in. Easy now, he murmured low enough to pass for prayer. The mare shifted her weight. The left fore felt lighter than yesterday. Ruby's bandage was snug and clean. He checked it, replaced the gauze, dabbed on hoof salve. Don't look at the nail hole. Look at the board's edge. His mother's saying, borrowed by Ruby, fell into place again. Don't stare at the hurt. Look toward the path. At the saddle corner, he lowered the old rig, rubbed in saddle oil in wide strokes. Linseed and leather turned the barn into a workshop of memory. He beveled frayed reins and stitched fresh holes with a curved needle, each pull through hide, like tugging patience back where it belongs. Buddy lay with her chin on his hat, eyes half closed, supervising like an old carpenter. Gabriel hummed a half-forgotten lullaby, deep and steady, breaking a little at the ends. Warmth from the house fire seeped through the wall and mixed with horse breath. He remembered the afternoon his father taught a 14-year-old to brush a mane big hand over small, not stiff, not rushed. Let the horse tell you what it needs. Pa, I'm listening again. His chest grew heavy, then like one long breath finally allowed. He opened the tack chest, body brush, clinch cutter, horseshoe nails rasp. On the lid, he set a new ledger, plain cloth cover, first page blank. His pencil laid a line. Day 1, barn cleaned. Left fore treated. Saddle stitch replaced. Water full. To do Leonardo, right fore. West drain trench. The straight letters stood like set posts. Small tasks calling small tasks. Life starting to befriend order again. He forked out old straw, cut a trench for urine to run dusted lime, the clean, sour tang rising. Sun fell through the window, lacing light across the falling chaff until it glimmered like early snow. I still have my hands. No witness needed. Broom shovel and hoof knife were both proof and medicine. Time for hooves. Leonardo lifted his right fore onto the stand. The shoe was thin nails proud like baby teeth. Gabriel worked the clinches loose, levered the shoe off. Iron and horse sweat mingled sharp and honest. The heels showed the white horn shone a glimpse of the life bone under daylight. He rasped measured tapped hands, sure as if working for a kin. He dragged a small coal pan to the door. He'd banked it in the stove last night, and now the heart glow was ready. New shoe to the coals iron, shifting from leaden gray to cherry red, a hiss when it met water. He set the shoe to the hoof, matched the rim, pinched with tongs, eyeing the line and measures. No one names out here, but every craftsman knows by feel. Pa, I remember. He smiled to himself. Buddy stood watched and sneezed coal smoke in her nose. Just as he lifted the hammer to drive the first nail, a horsefly bit, and Leonardo flinched. The hammer glanced. The nail slid toward the quick. In a split second, Gabriel's heart stumbled memory of a laminitis case sparking like a stray cinder. Easy, friend, he breathed, dropping the hammer to lay his cheek against the trembling neck, listening to the pulse in that rope of muscle. He took the nippers and backed the nail out, slow, straight, no twisting. A ruby drop welled at the edge. He washed with alcohol, dusted with powder-smeared antiseptic. I was foolish. He whispered into the ear. Let me put it right. Leonardo blew hard nostrils flaring, then set the hoof back down. Steady, the gentlest pardon a horse can give the man it trusts. He waited for the rhythm to settle, then drove the next nail's angle. Depth set each one, finding its box like rain clearing a pass. when the shoe lay true, and the clinches where even the hoof came down without a flinch. Gabriel let out a sound he hadn't dared in a long time. It wasn't about a shoe. It was about a chance accepted to fix what you've nearly spoiled. Some debts can't be paid back in time to a father or fully to a mother, but this morning, one crooked nail had been drawn and set right, enough for a heart to relearn how to rest inside a chest. Buggy wheels ticked softly at the gate. Ruby framed herself in the doorway, like a period placed just where it belonged. She brought cornbread butter and a warm canteen. Heard the hammer, she said. Figured you were talking to someone who doesn't answer in words. She bent to the hoof, nodded at the dry bandage and straight clinches. Good. She handed him the canteen. Drink. And when you wash up, spare yourself a little. He took it, warmth rising in his mouth under her flat, steady gaze. No one said a grand thank you. Quiet was still the language that fit this barn. Ruby went on to her patients. Buddy and Gabriel made a crew of 2. He dug the west drain where rain had pooled for years and bred swarms like a house throwing a party. The shovel bit down with a thock, the satisfying sound of giving a path to what needs to flow. He laid wooden pipe-packed gravel, tamped earth. Sweat ran along his spine, soaking the shirt. The air was cool, but his back felt hot like a man slipping free of a burden. He split pine and built a fresh watering trough. The clean green scent made yesterday feel far away. The saw sang, the chisel kept time, the square held true lessons in Western self-respect, straight, sturdy, unboastful. First fill, and not a leak. The surface lay so level, the sky used it as a mirror, a thin cloud swimming past like a lazy giant fish. A moment later, he spotted the well spout weeping. He wrapped the joint with leather-packed flax soaked in oil, twisted it tight. The final drop clung to the lip, and then let go flashing like a coin on a clean wish. Little fixes save big ones, his mother's house wisdom preached since he barely topped the table. Bite the leak before the barrel runs dry. He grinned alone, no one there to see the boy inside the man, finally obeying late and glad. By noon, he peeled off his gloves and studied a new ridge of callus at the base of his thumb, a line of life cut by wood iron and water instead of refusal. He washed his hands, fetched 2 slices of Ruby's leftover pie, and sat on the porch. The bell chimed, twice delicate, maybe the wind passing, maybe someone who knows how to pass at the right time. He broke a piece for Buddy. She ate slow like a soul, careful not to disturb a rite. He looked up. The cloud bank thinned. The ridge showed its ribs. Far off, the whistle rolled the valley, not a push to leave anymore, but the score to a picture about staying. He wiped his fingers on a cloth, the cinnamon scent holding to his skin. I've got work for this afternoon, and tomorrow, and next week. No grand design. Work enough for a heart to stand in its proper square. High noon, spread down like a sheet shaken flat. Gabriel laid out his tools on a new rack, hammer nippers, Nail's hoof knife, saddle oil rags, everything with a home. He flung the barn doors wide so Leonardo and the mare could look out at the pasture. The mare tested more weight on her left fore. The bandage stayed dry. Her eyes lost some guarded shine. Good, he told them. 15 minutes in the sun this afternoon. Simple sentences, like saying your children's names. He went inside for the ledger and penciled day 1 cont. Leonardo right for done, drain trench cut, new trough tight, well spout sealed. Tomorrow loft braces, paint barn door, run north fence. He sketched 3 empty boxes for the West's surprises, the thing he'd learned: don't pack a day so full that life can't edge in. Before he shut the book, he tore a small slip and shaped a few spare words, the kind men of few words use. 2 o'clock, Miller's Creek. The aspens will be good today. G. He slid the note into the crease of Ruby's medical book, set it on the step where her buggy wheel always passed, and pinned it with a small stone against the breeze. A small act, but for a man who'd been running it, was the biggest promise he'd made all month. He hung his father's hat on the nail beside the silver cross, 2 gray-haired relics of the house. At the door, the bell spoke a new note. Not chance, perhaps the land confirming a signed truce. Gabriel stood in the threshold, while sunlight filtered through drifting dust in a spray of sparks, not gold, but the kind of wealth a man who's been poor understands. He stepped into the yard. His spurs clicked once on the step, small as a passport stamp to a new country. "Buddy," he called to the barn, "let's turn the horses out." The dog popped up, tail changing a question mark into an exclamation point. Leonardo took a few long strides. The mare followed. Noon light drew a bright edge along their manes. Above, a flock stitched itself into a V. Below, the new drain winked. Everything whispered a sentence Gabriel heard most clearly: right direction. He went back in and damped the stove, enough glow left to bank for evening. Before he shut the door, he looked at the new roof, the straight fence, the full trough, the quiet spout, the pages with ink, the note with a plan. Some miracles don't split the sky. They arrive on time with the work. For Gabriel, this morning was that kind. He took up his hat and touched a finger to the silver cross, not begging for shelter, but promising to keep the house. The bell chimed 2 small notes, the wind pushing pine scent into the kitchen where the fire now slept. In the yard, a hoof stamped. Buddy barked once. Gabriel smiled, turned, and strode for the barn, where small tasks waited, where life was ready to mesh its gears again. And if someone asks him someday, "When did you stop running?" he won't tell of storms, funerals, or candlelit proposals. He'll tell about an autumn morning, a sleigh bell calling a man to work a horseshoe nail, nearly driven wrong and drawn straight, and a little note left on a porch step. Because coming back doesn't always thunder. Sometimes it ticks like spurs on wood, steady enough for a heart to find its beat again. Part 4. The second look. That morning the sky was clear as a pane of glass laid over the prairie. The wind moved unhurried, just enough to stir the needle grass, just enough to carry the scents of saddle leather, young pine, and warm earth waking up. Gabriel rode ahead on Leonardo. Ruby sat steady on the buggy, piled with fence posts, pliers, wire hammer, and nails. Buddy ran looping circles, sometimes skimming past the horse's legs, her tail drawing a happy ink line across the grass. They headed for the north fence, the boundary long shoved askew by range bulls, the wire sagging like sentences of forgiveness left unfinished. "I once set fence in Wyoming," Gabriel said, measuring the span, his voice easy as wind. Snow came early. One hand on the hammer, the other coaxing the horse not to turn its back to the gale. That night, the saloon fire looked like heaven's own. Ruby smiled. "I set fence in Copper Creek, no snow, but there was Elizabeth on the porch calling me in for pie when the heat laid down." The first post went into the ground, the hammer falling cack-cack, to the steady heartbeat of a morning not yet tired. Ruby pulled the wire. Gabriel stretched and tied. "Figure 8 knot," he said. "Won't slip and easy to release." "Like some people," Ruby answered, hazel eyes glinting. "Hold tight enough not to lose, soft enough to let go when you should." They moved to the next post. A band of antelope cut the horizon thin strokes across a blue page. Farther off, the new rails flashed like a length of silver laid quiet. "When I first came here," Ruby said, "every time I heard the train, I wanted to run like some car might carry me off from sorrow." She tightened the wire in her palms. "Now I only think someone's on their way home." Gabriel looked along a wire that lay straight as a sentence returned to its subject. "I lived on the long road too long," he said, mouth set. "The farther I went, the thinner I became. This morning, when the sleigh bell rang, I thought, staying takes guts too." Ruby lifted her face, sunlight pouring into her eyes, warming the hazel half a shade. "You have that," she said lightly, not praising. "At least enough to draw one line straight without yelling at the wind." The wind murmured through the grass like someone else's quiet laughter. Buddy barked twice the morning's exclamation point. An eagle circled high. Ruby shaded her eyes. Some things only look right from far away. Gabriel drove the third post and nodded. And some things only wear their true name the second time you look. The words dropped between them like a small fish touching water. Not a splash, only rings, widening, slow. They didn't chase them. They kept setting fence. At Miller's Creek, they tied the horses under the aspens. Gold leaves trembled overhead, the sunlight sifting into honeycomb patterns on the water. Ruby took from the basket cornbread cheese apples and a coffee flask wrapped in cloth. "This was your mother's favorite spot," she said. "She told me aspens are kin to hearts that still tremble." Gabriel laughed. She had a way of speaking, straight to the bruise. They sat on a sun-warmed stone. Buddy waded the edges, chasing the ripples she made herself. "Jeremy loved rivers," Ruby said, watching Buddy, her voice calm as a surface after wind. "Said water teaches you to go around and still arrive." She smoothed the edge of the basket cloth. "The day he died, I hated every current. I wanted to shut every valve. Elizabeth said, 'Let one thin stream run through you, don't close them all. If not, pain will turn to swamp somewhere.'" Gabriel was quiet a beat. He drew a small whittling knife and a piece of pale wood from his pocket. "I like carving horses," he said, "on long roads that won't let you think too hard." The blade moved. The scent of fresh wood drifted. Shavings fell like chalk snow onto his trouser leg. "My father used to say, 'Walking won't fix what you have to face, son.' I refused that. 8 years was enough to learn he was never wrong." Ruby watched the blade cut away the extra to reveal the shape. "Just like stitching a wound," she said. "Take the rot, leave the sound. Don't keep what you only miss out of stubbornness." She held the wood for him when he needed to turn it. The teamwork was quiet and smooth, as if the two of them had long been working on the same hurt and only today were naming it. When the horse's form stood clear, Ruby smiled. "It has a stubborn nose, like its owner," Gabriel teased. Her smile couldn't hide a small scar at her temple. He noticed. "You." "Buggy flipped near Wichita," she said, simple. "A small mark enough to remind me a life doesn't need a big reason to snap." She touched her chest. "The bigger scar is here, An aspen leaf loosed and fell, light as a sigh. Gabriel drew a deep breath. "I'm going to stay," he said, as if telling the water before telling the woman. Ruby turned, not pretending she hadn't heard. Stay for whom? A question asked by someone who had once been left by a promise to stay. Gabriel looked across the creek, where sunlight ran like liquid gold. "For the house," he said, "and for the woman sitting by the water, the one teaching me to stitch what should be kept and release what must be let go." Ruby didn't say thank you, didn't hide the tear brightening her lash. She only nodded, the nod of a doctor feeling a pulse come even. "Then eat an apple," she said, "so you'll remember something. Crisp can still be sweet." By afternoon, they were back on the West Run. The land rose rough old rock ribs, pushing up like the edges of a worn blade. Ruby dragged barbed wire a wrap of cloth on her palm to blunt the cut. Gabriel lifted posts, swung the hammer, twisted with the pliers, every motion an attempt to return this maze to a straight line. Buddy suddenly pricked her ears, growled. From the sage, a bull stepped out, horns spread like a giant tuning fork. He tested a post. The wire sang out a complaint. Ruby slid a half-step back and slipped on gravel. "Don't watch the horns, watch the shoulder," Gabriel said quickly, dropping a rope loop over his wrist. He turned and cast the loop fell clean around the bull's neck. The bull heaved. Leonardo squealed behind and danced free of the tie. Ruby ran in, tied a second line to a parallel post, slid the cutter into the wire, and snipped where it bit too tight, giving the animal a breath. The bull hit once more. The rope checked him firm enough to teach, not kill. Gabriel took the angle, right the pressure, and give a language every cowhand knows. The bull stood huffing. The white of his eyes eased. Gabriel slackened the rope by degrees, voice low. "Go on, friend." The animal backed a step, then two, turned and rejoined the herd, leaving red dust settling like a light rain. The wire sagged and frayed a torn place that would show where the fight had been. Ruby sat down hard on the bank, blood welling in her palm where the thin wrap hadn't covered. Gabriel dropped to a knee, pulled alcohol gauze needle this time, his hands the nurse's. "It'll sting," he warned. "Just count," she said. "I'm good at counting." He laid 3 small stitches. His fingers shook a little, not from blood, but from the thought that this was a hand he wanted to protect. "You're crazy and skilled," he said, tying the knot. "I simply don't leave," Ruby answered, gaze steady, voice unshaken. Wind slid through the grass, with the sound of silk rubbing. Gabriel took her hand, not like a savior holding the rescued, but like a man choosing an ally. Her palm was warm, her pulse even. Neither drew away quickly. They let the silence say it here. On the ridge, the clouds thinned. The sun dropped, laying a band of fire across the iron at Gabriel's hip. He let her hand go bent to rebend the wire. Ruby braced the post. When the last bar bit its groove, they released it once and breathed in the same beat. A boundary had been raised, not just between land and cattle, but between yesterday and today. They paused on the slope when Copper Creek spread below, like a lit map, white church roof, saloon glowing gold rail yard shining a line of steel. The train horn held a long note, not urging, simply marking the hour. Ruby sat on a crosspiece, red-dusted shoes swinging. "When I first arrived," she said, "I sat here and wondered who I was in that picture. Widow, doctor's daughter, nurse, 3 labels, and none of them me." Gabriel leaned a shoulder against a post, watching Lawson's chimney send a straight plume into the sky. I sat somewhere like that too, between Kansas and Texas, staring at sheep camps' black cattle like question marks on yellow earth. My name was the man passing through, never tied to a place longer than the rainy season. He turned. Evening cut a pale edge around Ruby's face. Now I want a different name. Ruby tilted her head. What name keeper of a house? He swallowed. And if I may, someone's husband. The words came out without ceremony, just on time with the heart. Ruby looked down at her hands, at the neat small stitches he'd placed. Those names scare me, she admitted. Not because of pretense, but because of loss. Names can break with the person. She lifted her eyes, hazel washed, with a thin sheen, not weakness honesty. If you stay, don't make a big promise. Staying long enough is the promise. The wind gentled. The aspens in the valley shook their leaf bells. Gabriel stepped closer and held out his hand, saying nothing. Ruby set her hand in his, asking nothing. They walked a waltz without music, a 3-count kept by wind and hearts. Spurs on stone tick-tack-tack where violins would have sung. You dance well for a man who likes hoof knives, Ruby teased. Ma made me learn, he said. I won't have my boy hop around like a bear with a sore foot. They stopped when the sun was more than half gone. Ruby drew her hand back and stood a little as if listening for her heart's bulletin. Maybe. I'm starting to believe the name you chose, she said. But I'll need a second look and a third. Gabriel nodded, smiling. I'll be on time for the second. He pointed toward the far depot. And that whistle won't tell me who I am anymore. Below, oil lamps flicked on. Above, they shared a silence that wasn't awkward. 2 people, 1 town a line just set straight, and a waltz only they would remember. They reached the cabin under a deepening blue. The sleigh bell rang one brief note of welcome. Ruby fed the fire. Onion and dill rose from the soup she'd brought. Gabriel hung his hat, set the knife on the shelf, and laid the new carved horse beside the old 2 generations of stubborn in a row. Buddy rolled once by the hearth and took up her post. They ate soup from 2 enamel bowls, finished the last of the cornbread, drank coffee still warm. On the wall, the silver cross threw back fire like a low star. Tomorrow, Ruby said, I'll come early to change the dressing and bring paint for the barn door. Gabriel nodded. I'll weave more straw netting brace the loft. And toward evening, if the weather's kind, let's go to Miller's Creek again. Ruby smiled. So the leaves can check whether we keep our word. A slip of wind brushed the porch. The bell chimed thinly. Ruby glanced at the frame. Where there's still a bell, there's still waiting, you were right. Gabriel pressed his palm to the E&G table. I used to hate waiting, he said. Feared being left so much I'd leave first with no one chasing me. Today, I want to wait. He paused, then added, and be waited for. Ruby didn't rush her answer. She rose, went to the doorway, and touched the bell lightly, just enough to draw a fine streak of sound. She turned back, eyes bright like a station lamp late at night. Then we start with small things, she said, showing up on time. Soup, stitches. If love has feet, it walks on those. Gabriel didn't reach to hold her. He hadn't asked for that right. But he set in her hands the little horse he'd carved. Keep it at your place, he said. When I'm late, it'll look at me for you. Ruby laughed, tears shining the kind that he'll not undo. It'll be strict, she said, like its maker. She lifted her shawl and took her hat. Gabriel opened the door. Night lowered, stars pinned to the sky. A coyote called off-key, like a violin gone stray. "Gabriel," she said at the threshold. Thank you for the waltz without music." He smiled. His spur ticked once. "Thank you for the second look." The door closed. The bell rang twice. Gabriel turned down the lamps, leaving one to mind the house like that first night. He sat in his mother's chair and listened as his heart done galloping across nameless lands began to walk inside a numbered home. Outside, the north fence stood straight wire tight as a freshly written vow. On the shelf, the two wooden horses faced the same way toward tomorrow. Where the wind has gentled, pine smoke has softened, and spur clicks no longer announce a leaving, but pace the steps of staying there. Love begins to green from old wounds, not bright, but lasting. And when the sleigh bell chimed once more, Gabriel understood it was time to learn to wait and to be waited for. That morning, the wind slid down from the pines into the valley, cold enough to tighten the skin of the well water. Gabriel sat at the kitchen table, whetstone in hand, drawing his pocket knife back and forth with a steady rrr, like a breath that knew its pace. By the door, the sleigh bell chimed soft, calling the early hour. On the wall, his mother's silver cross caught a thin seam of sunlight, like a thread someone was using to stitch a quiet morning closed. He set the knife down and looked out across the yard. Leonardo cropping grass, the new wooden trough, bright as a mirror. The north fence, straight as a sentence, returned to its subject. But inside his chest, the line between yesterday and today was still blurred. A trace of pine smoke from the stove stirred an old evening, the night he'd spoken bitter words to his father, and walked out only to come back 3 days later for the coffin. A light knock. Ruby stepped in brown, cloak-brimmed hat, cupping her chestnut hair. In her hands, a pressed shirt collar and a black string tie. "Father says the memorial starts at 11, she said gently. "I came to help tie this." Elizabeth hated careless knots. She stepped close. Soap and cinnamon apple brushed the air. Her fingers tied, snugged straightened the knot, one small act that made his whole body go still. "Ruby," he said, voice dry as old pine, "if I can't hold it together in the middle." "You count," she answered, eyes on the knot. "Count your breaths like when we cut that calf loose. And look at me, like on the roof edge." Gabriel nodded and drew a long breath. He unbuckled his gun belt and hung it on the peg beside the cross, a private ritual, before walking into church. "Today," he said, "I want my hands empty so I can hold the right things." Ruby smiled, but a sheen touched her lashes. "Good," she whispered. "We'll go with 2 hands." She passed him a worn leather Bible, Elizabeth's Sunday book. On the first page, his mother's shaky hand read, "Be gentle with your memories, so the past does not rule the present." Gabriel laid his calloused palm over the line, as if meeting his own eyes in a mirror. Buddy rose, wagged, and fell in beside them as they headed to the door. Outside, a train horn held a long note calling up the far years. Gabriel set his hat on his spur, clicked once on the step, small, decisive, like a stamp on paper. He locked the door and glanced a last time at the cross. Today, he was leaving not to run, but to face. And that thin line between what had been and what was coming waited for him to give it a name. The white-roofed church of Copper Creek stood on a small rise, doors open, beeswax candles sweet in the air. Inside, the long pews shone with years of Sunday coats. Fine scratches held the feel of stories people had swallowed halfway. Townfolk filled most of the benches. Hank Peterson, with his black hat on his knees. Mrs. Lawson, hugging an apple pie for the after-service table. Mrs. Gonzalez whispering to her two girls. Dr. Wilson Stern kindly stood near the pulpit. As Gabriel and Ruby entered, heads turned, hands lifted. No word weighed heavier than it needed to. Gabriel took off his hat spurs, ticking on the wood, and sat in the third pew, the family's old row. The space beside him, his mother's place, opened like a well. Ruby sat on the far side of that space, not filling it, keeping the bank like someone guarding the water. Pastor Mills stepped up, voice warm and slow, as if he spoke to each person alone. Today we remember Elizabeth Harris, who knew that kindness is how you stand on the side of light in a harsh land. The hymn rose, men's and women's voices, braiding like small streams, finding one river. Gabriel opened the Bible. His fingers brushed the frayed page edges, his mother's thumbprints. The reading was Jeremiah, "I will restore health unto thee, and I will heal thee of thy wounds." Each word felt like a hand laid over his heart. Then the stories began. Mrs. Lawson stood, voice trembling. Elizabeth sat with me 3 nights when Mary burned with fever. She cooked soup, told stories. I thought God had forgotten my door. She knocked for him. Hank chuckled rough. The time I drank myself flat on the saloon steps, Elizabeth hauled me up, made me drink water, and read the Psalms right there in the street. I said it was shameful. She said, shame in the right place turns into grace. Laughter rippled, then settled. Dr. Wilson adjusted his glasses. I lost many cases. Elizabeth came, asked no why, only when do we eat. She taught me losing isn't the end. It's the handoff point between us and God. A heavy door in Gabriel's mind swung open. Suddenly he saw his father at the far aisle. Hands on hips, eyes, half anger, half worry. The afternoon they'd quarreled over long road dreams. I need out of this choking town, the younger voice had shouted. You go, don't come back, his father had roared. A door slam. 3 days later, black suit. His chest cinched. Ruby's hand lit on the back of his no grip, just presence. Count, she breathed, anchoring him across the empty space. He inhaled one. Look at me. He exhaled 2. No one in the church knew a man had just crossed a canyon on 2 numbers. When Pastor invited any last words, Gabriel stood. Spurs ticked. The small sound boomed like a drum in his ears. He climbed the steps, laid his hat beside the Bible. Sun through colored glass painted his shoulders in red and blue like wound and water. He swallowed. I'm Gabriel Harris, he began, son of Elizabeth, and of Mr. Harris who, nobody could set the north fence straighter than he could. A few smiles, fences eased the air a notch. Gabriel gripped the podium. His knuckles went white. I left for 8 years. I thought miles would scrub my mistakes clean. They don't. My father died before I could say sorry. And when my mother called, I was 3 days late. His voice split like old plank meeting rain. Wind sighed along the eaves as if answering. He drew a creased letter from his pocket, Elizabeth's last. In here, he read she wrote, Don't let memory be the master. Let love be the guide. Your father didn't take that day's anger with him. Neither do I. He looked out straight at the faces. Today, I want to ask Copper Creek to forgive me for being late, and if you can't give me room to fix what I can with my hands, I'll mend roofs, straighten fences, set hinges for any house that needs it. And as for my father, I asked to forgive him, because he forgave me before I knew I needed it. Silence held not heavy, more like a rest before the choir's next entrance. Hank stood first, nodding. Hinge on my barn door's been sagging since winter. I'll be waiting this week. Warm, low laughter. Mrs. Lawson dabbed her eyes. My kitchen window squeals. If you come, bring a pinch of cinnamon for the pie, too. Pastor Mills rested a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. You declared the hardest thing your own fault. Folks often carry other people's sins to God. You brought yours. That's enough for one service. He faced the room. We'll pray, not to erase the past that's above our pay grade, but to file it in the right drawer. Ruby stood, quiet lips moving a private prayer. Dr. Wilson bowed his head, old shoulders no longer ironed stiff by loss. The hymn rose again, richer now road dust in every note. When Gabriel stepped down his spurs, no longer sounded like a sentence. They tapped like the steps of someone relearning how to walk. Afterwards, the crowd flowed into the churchyard. Soup bowls, pie slices, soft talk. But Gabriel slipped the other way, up the narrow path to the hill of graves, where the pines grew close, resin-thick stones still warm from noon. Ruby didn't ask. She just walked beside him, keeping the kind of distance where he could hear a skirt brush the grass. On the rise, two markers lay side by side. Harris one, for his father, one for his mother. Gabriel set his hat on the turf and dropped to one knee palm on the carved names. Pa, he said, no, mister. Like in the old days, I wasn't good at staying. I mistook leaving for freedom. I let a wrong swallow 3 days. I've been late all along. Wind twisted his shirt like an old hand, smoothing a boy's hair. He turned to his mother's stone. Ma, I read your letter. I believe you. I know. You forgave me before I asked. He lifted the silver cross from his neck. He'd worn it since Buddy dug it up and set it on a small stone between the markers. I'll leave it here tonight. Tomorrow morning I'll take it home. I want this keepsake to stay beside you two. One night. Simple words, but his hand shook. Ruby stood behind, silent. After a time, she stepped half forward and laid a sprig of sweet vernal grass beside the cross. A patient once told me she murmured a pinch of sweet grass in your boot eases the miles. I hope the road from here tires you less. Gabriel looked up. Her hazel eyes shone, but they held steady like two fence posts just set deep. He pressed his hands together, not a long prayer, only the 3 hardest words, I forgive you. Then after a beat, please forgive me. Wind slid by. A few pine needles fell. The smell of earth grew thick as honey. From the valley, a far horn blew, not to call him away, but to send greeting to those who had gone ahead. They sat on the grass edgebacks, leaning together, faces left forward, leaving the view to the departed. Buddy sprawled muzzle on Gabriel's hat. Overhead, a cloud ripped into 2 sheets. Evening poured through the torn edge and gilded the stones. The border between past and present went thin as skin, and he felt himself walking it without falling. They came down to the cabin under a star-stitched sky. The sleigh bell gave one short headline of sound. Gabriel laid the fire. The stove began speaking in the dry wood language of little pops. Ruby slipped off her cloak and hung it on the peg beside his gun belt, the wall now holding tokens of leaving and of staying. I left bread on the table, she said. You eat and then write. She tipped her chin at the cloth-bound ledger he'd started in the barn. Gabriel sat pencil in hand. By firelight, he wrote, date, memorial for Elizabeth, spoke the truth before the town, asked and forgave, took Hank's barn hinge and Mrs. Lawson's window, left the cross on the hill for one night, did not run today. He paused, then added a small line beneath letters, slanting a touch, as if the heart exhaled chose to stay. He folded the book and set the little wooden horse on it like a paperweight. Buddy nosed the nape of his neck, angling for the last line. Gabriel smiled and turned to Ruby. Tonight I'm at peace. For the first time, Ruby poured black coffee into 2 cups and handed him one. You just made a down payment on the present, she said. Tomorrow we'll fetch the cross. Then we'll paint the barn door. She sipped and watched the flame. You know, to a nurse, sometimes resuscitation is only keeping someone breathing steady until the heart remembers its trade. Today, your heart seems to remember. Outside, a coyote sent one lovely, lonely note. Wind slid through the cracks. The bell answered with 2. Gabriel stepped onto the porch and looked toward the dark hill. Up there, the silver cross lay beside the 2 names he'd just said the last words to. In here, the stove glowed. The E&G table waited. The shelf held a wooden horse. The wall hung a gun. He did not need to touch. The roof didn't leak. The trough was full. Not to brag that trouble was over, only to witness that he'd learned a word few teach enough. He came back in and set his hand on Ruby's shoulder, a steady touch, not hurried. Thank you, he said, for keeping a bank on the empty place beside me in church. Ruby tilted a smile tears bright that did not fall. Tomorrow, she said, I'll sit the other bank, and we'll lay a bridge. Night pulled slow. The fire quieted, changing to the low murmur of someone who has finished the story. On the table, the ledger lay by the whetstone, the pencil perched like a small fence rail, dividing what was from what is. In the doorway, the bell waited for wind. And somewhere deep in Gabriel's chest, the border between past and present ceased to be a cliff. It became the edge of a field, one side harvested the other ready for seed. From that edge, he could wave across without regret, without fear, because he had chosen the only road that truly crosses between 2 banks' forgiveness. Part 6. The Lesson of a Faithful Creature. That morning, wind breathed down from the ridge carrying the scent of young pine and damp earth. The sleigh bell on the doorframe chimed a thin note, like a fingertip, tapping the rim of a new day. Gabriel poured black coffee, warmed his hands over the cup, and let his eyes wander across a room that now felt familiar, with pine smoke saddle leather and linseed oil. Buddy, the smoke-backed shepherd, had already been awake, sitting at the threshold with her head-cocked ears, cupping the breeze like 2 small bowls. She didn't scratch the door or bark. She only watched him with the weighty look of one who knows something before her master does. Go on, then, say your piece, Gabriel teased, still half dreaming. Buddy gave a round little MH like a coin rolling on wood. She rose, circled the E&G table, stopped at one of Elizabeth's old handkerchiefs hanging from a chair, drew in a long breath, then fixed her gaze on the north pasture where the new fence ran tight these last few days. She glanced back at him once more, tail ticking just enough. Gabriel set the cup down, slid into his dusty boots, and clicked his spurs. All right, lead on. He shrugged into his heavy coat, slipped a hand to his pocket knife, and out of habit touched the revolver hanging on the peg beside the silver cross, then left it there. Today he would walk with empty hands. In the barn, Leonardo pricked his ears. The mare tested her mended hoof on clean straw, breathing little white flags. Buddy left the porch, skimming the yard in short bursts, running then looking back. To be sure, he followed. She didn't streak like an arrow. She held herself in the composure of a sentry who understands the importance of what she's about to show. October lay clear as glass over the prairie. Far rails flashed. A train horn held one long note and fell silent, the greeting of another life. Gabriel drew a long breath of wet grass and dew. In his chest, his heart was strangely calm, as if a steady hand had soothed it. Buddy led him past the north corner, along a thick run of sage, and down a shallow draw toward Miller's Creek. Aspen leaves had just begun to fall, brushing each other into a bell-like whisper. The dog stopped on a flat patch of ground, bunched her forepaws, and dug. Her claws raked through dry thatch. Dark soil kicked up in sprays. Gabriel watched, remembering that first night when she dug at the porch and hauled up the silver cross from a nameless hump of earth, the gift that made him stop running. Again, he murmured, kneeling. Buddy paused to lick his knuckles, then set to work with clockwork rhythm. The earth beneath the grass was tighter than usual, as if a hand had tamped it down. A fine cedar scent slipped out through the opening seam. Gabriel felt that quick tilt of the heart, the sense of standing before something larger than anyone prepares you for. Buddy froze statue still. She growled, low eyes locked on a clump of grass 3 steps away. Gabriel heard a dry scuff, something sliding. He threw an arm across the dog's chest, drew his knife, and took a half-step back, sweeping the ground with his eyes. A young rattler, moss-mottled coiled tongue tasting. Buddy hummed, neither lunging nor afraid. Her look said, "I'm here." Gabriel picked up a dead branch and tapped the ground, sending small tremors easing the snake toward a rock crevice. It rasped and slipped away. He exhaled. Buddy glanced up. Tail thumped once small matter finished onto the big one. "All right," he said gently, offering his hand. Buddy dug again. The earth released a flap of old oilcloth and the flash of tin. Gabriel slid his fingers under and lifted a flat tin box, palm-wide tied with darkened jute. On the lid, a familiar hand had been scratched with a knife tip. "For my son, when you have learned to come back." His heart caught. Buddy plopped down, head tilted, sighing like someone who just nudged a boulder out of the way. Gabriel set the tin on his knee dust, framing it in a rough halo. The jute rasped under his fingertips. The figure 8 knot, only Elizabeth used snug, but meant to be undone slowly. "Ma," he whispered, as if afraid to wake a sleeper beyond the aspens. He didn't hurry. He looked around first. The ground wasn't random. Years ago, he and his father had set a small stake here after a flood tore the boundary out. Water had dragged. People set it back. This dirt had taken the sweat of 3 Harris hands on a burning noon. Beneath them, aspen roots braided a net to hold the bank. "I see it, Ma," he murmured. "You buried it in the roots." Buddy eased back 2 paces and lay flat chin, on paw's eyes, unblinking the watch of a good drover. Gabriel cut the cord and opened the lid. Cedar smell rose clear. Elizabeth always lined her boxes with cedar slivers to keep insects off. On top lay a square of ivory lace browned with time. He lifted it. Beneath was an old tin-type silver black of a boy of 8 on a wooden horse, a man's hands steadying his shoulders from behind. Gabriel went still. His father smiled in that picture, a smile rare as August rain. Below that lay a small ring of keys, house-tack chest kitchen cupboard bound by a strip of dark leather, and a little drawstring bag. He poured out a folding knife. His father's, its spine scratched with the letters HG, worn thin. The engraver had mixed the order, but Pa had laughed. That way, we never forget Harris, and Gabriel is one. Gabriel popped the blade clack, the old rhythm. Last was a folded note. Elizabeth's hand here was firm, none of the tremor in the altar letter clearly written earlier when her hand was still sure. Son, if you find this, it means you have heard the land's call louder than the trains. In the pouch is your father's knife, so your hands can finish the work. There's a picture of you two, so you'll remember how people can love each other and be bad at saying it. There are keys to tell you everything has a home. And there is cedar, so memory won't be eaten by moths. If one day you're lost, follow the most faithful creature in the house. It will hear the earth for you. At the bottom, she had added, and if you've met the nurse with hazel eyes, listen to her when you can't hear yourself. You and she each hold one end of the rope. A breeze gathered. Aspen leaves answered in a dry hymn. Buddy sniffed the box edge. Her tail tapped. Gabriel set the photo in his palm and watched the silver catch sunlight into a faint sheen, like a memory that appears only when you tip it to the right angle. You did good, he told Buddy, voice jagged at the edges. The dog blinked up at him, without a speck of town dog pride, only presence, which made him feel kept. Let's take this home, he said, stacking the pieces as if filing days back into order. He tied the jute again, his mother's figure 8. Standing, he placed a flat stone on the dug spot, not to hide it, but to remember. On the way back, he carried the box. Buddy heeled close. Leaf bells rang overhead. Cedar lingered in the air, like a voice still hanging there. Back at the cabin, the sleigh bell chimed a welcome. Gabriel set the tin on the E&G table and lit a beeswax candle. Its glow stretched his shadow across the floor and up over the silver cross. He washed and dried his hands, then opened the box again, this time under a roof, before coals glowing red. He turned the keys over his wrist, recalling the boyhood click of latches giving way. Each key named a space the tack chest already open. The kitchen cupboard spices, cinnamon dill salt, the loft trunk fabric, and photographs. Everything has a home, he murmured a simple creed he'd rejected half his youth. Buddy sat at his boots, eyes fixed on his hands, drawing a quiet circle of guard around the table. A light knock. Ruby stepped in collar, knit a forest green, a basket in her arms. Father's got calls in town. I brought soup and some bread. She paused at the tin, and her gaze softened. Gabriel nodded and drew it closer. Buddy took me to it, he said. My mother left it for when I'd learned to come back. Ruby pulled a chair and sat. The cedar scent made her smile. Elizabeth and her good wood, she used it to keep memory from splitting and worming. She touched the tintype. Silver pooled on her fingertip like dew. You look ornery, she teased, nodding at the boy astride the wooden horse. Gabriel told about the mixed-up HG, the figure 8 knot, the ring of keys. Ruby unpacked a small cloth. For a lining, she said, and slipped it under the tintype. setting it in the middle like a small household altar. She read the note. When she reached the line about a hazel-eyed nurse, she stilled, not with surprise, but with feeling. Her hand pressed her chest. She drew a breath, tucking a rising cry in where her heart lay. She saw farther than all of us. They made fresh coffee, bitter strong, warm in the hand. Ruby laid out soup and bread. Buddy received a small portion and chewed it with ceremony, as if she understood the rite. While they ate, Ruby drew a soft leather strap from her bag. Here, she said, passing it to Gabriel. A new collar for your friend. I'll add a tag so when you hear a bell, you'll know where it's calling from. Her eyes flicked to the sleigh bell at the door. So, the house can call you back when you wander a little. Gabriel laughed under his breath. I thought a house called with stove smoke and pie. Ruby arched a brow. Add a bell, and you won't get lost. He nodded, pried the tin lid's thin sheet free, and with his knife scratched a small heart on it, carving a single letter inside B for Buddy. Ruby produced a tiny punch from her medical kit. She always carried what others didn't think to, and made a hole at the edge. Gabriel slid the strap through and tied it. Another figure 8, Ruby smiled. I swear your whole family serves one kind of knot. He buckled the collar around Buddy's neck. The dog stood surprisingly still. Then she shook once, and the tin tag kissed the leather with a clear ting. Gabriel started the sound, was the pocket-sized twin of the bell on the door. Ruby's eyes lit. There. The house is hanging from her neck now. Afternoon leaned on the roof. Sunlight leafed the wall in gold squares. Gabriel lifted his father's knife, breathed in the oil along its blade, and sat on the step. Buddy lay beside him. Each time she turned her head, the tin tapped the leather, one small, bright note too soft to bother clear enough to name presence. You saved me from a rattler, he said, half to the wind. Buddy's tail thumped. She yawned wide as a saloon door while the evening spur wind hummed. Ruby sat a step above Hands, cupped around her mug eyes on the far hill. When Jeremy died, she said low, and even I lived like a woman gone half deaf. Every train whistle turned to silence. 3 months later, a stray pup wandered into the clinic. It followed me everywhere, even into surgery. We got scolded. But I realized an animal doesn't mirror your sorrow. It demands a place beside your sorrow. And that leaves room for human voices to come back. Gabriel nodded. I chased the human voice off for too long. He nodded at Buddy's tag. Now every time I hear it, I'll remember one small sound is enough to make a man turn back. Ruby's fingers brushed the lace square on the table through the open door. Elizabeth was wise. She didn't leave you sermons. She left you things. Things with cent-weight use to lead a man back into life. She looked at Buddy, and she enrolled you under a very furry teacher. Buddy listened, met her gaze, and wagged as if to tip her hat. Rain's far scent crept on the wind. I want to try the keys, Gabriel said, standing. The ring was cool in his palm, wakeful. He went inside, worked the kitchen cupboard, tumblers clicked, the door side open. In the corner sat a wrapped bundle Elizabeth's stash of brown sugar for children. He opened it and found a small pie tin and a stick of cinnamon. He barked a dry, sudden laugh. Ma still spoils me at 30. Ruby leaned on the jam, laughing with him. Boys will be boys. Gabriel returned to the steps, set the cinnamon on the table, snapped a small piece off, and offered Buddy a crumb. The dog sniffed and declined, then angled for bread. "Our house guard is particular," Ruby teased. The tin tag chimed a co-conspirator's ting. At the threshold, two bells, the big one on the door and the small one on the dog, told the same story of staying in two voices. Gabriel tipped his chin toward Miller's Creek. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll bring the tin up to the hill. Let Ma know her four-legged pupil has taught me a lesson." Ruby nodded, her eyes warm as a lamp. "And so, I can lay a hand on your picture one more time." Next morning dawned like laundered cloth, clean, cool, wind fresh. Gabriel, Ruby, and Buddy climbed the hill. The tin tag chimed now and then. The sleigh bell on the cabin was quiet behind them. At Elizabeth's stone, Gabriel set the tin down and opened it one piece at a time, as if opening the field notes of a life. Ruby spread the lace and placed the tintype on it, the heartbeat of the morning. Ma Gabriel said, voice level and deep, "I followed the faithful creature. She led me to the things that keep faith, the ones that don't betray. He lifted the folding knife, so sun slid along its spine. I'll use it to build, not to cut a rope that should hold." He hung the ring of keys on a little wooden peg he set in the crosspost nearby, like hanging up a new habit, every door with its key, every sorrow with its room. Ruby laid fresh sweetgrass under the stone, its fine threads smelling pure as clean memory. "Elizabeth," she whispered, "your boy is doing the things that need doing. Rest easy." Buddy stepped up, set her paws on the edge of the marker, and the little bell chimed a dog's hello. Gabriel bent, stroked her head, laughing through a tight throat. They sat back to back as before, watching blue light sift through gold leaves. After a while, Gabriel rose and took the knife to the old boundary stake near the graves, the one he, his father, and his mother had once set, and carved a single word, "Stay." He cut slow and deep, letting the blade follow the heart's intention. Ruby watched and nodded. That was the shortest, truest translation of every sermon ever preached. Coming down, they stopped at Hank's forge. Gabriel held up the leftover circle of tin. "Stamp home on this for me." Hank lifted his brows and smiled with his eyes, and the dog's tag, Gabriel raised Buddy's collar. "We're keeping the B," he said, "but I want one more word." Hank set the tin on the anvil and hammered kang metal, waking the vein of something that lasts. When home came up, Buddy seemed to understand. She shook her head, so B and home kissed with two bright chimes. Ruby broke into a laugh light as coffee foam. By evening, they were back at the cabin. Gabriel fixed the home plate to the beam above the E&G table. He hung the folding knife on its hook, dropped the keys in a drawer, and set the tintype into a rough frame he'd made. The doorbell gave one long note, wind bearing news. Buddy sprawled with her head on Gabriel's hat, eyes half closed in the contentment of a creature that knows enough. Before the fire, Gabriel said quietly, "Work is the prayer of those who don't speak well, and faithfulness is the vow of those who don't promise well." Ruby leaned into him, no countersign needed. Outside, the prairie breathed, aspens shivered, and the distant rails glimmered like a memory domesticated. Inside, the tin lay still. The knife-slept keys had hooks. The picture had a frame. The tag had a voice. And Buddy, the furry teacher, had taught Gabriel a hard lesson in the simplest way, by standing beside him and not leaving. When night settled, The little bell on Buddy's collar and the sleigh bell at the door answered each other now, and then across the dark hall, two small points on the night's map guiding a path back to the fire. Gabriel listened and smiled. For the first time in years, he slept without chasing a train whistle in his dreams. And if his mother was watching from somewhere along that dark ridge, she surely nodded, because the thing she believed had come to pass. A dog had taught her son to come home by a tin tag that rang very softly, softly and enough. Part 7. Accepting Loss, Welcoming Love. Night wind came down from the pines the way an old man walks unhurried, carrying resin and a chill about to spill into the valley. The sleigh bell on the door frame gave one dry note, then fell quiet. Gabriel teased the fire in the stove. Dry wood clicked and popped like a metronome tapping on the heart. Buddy lay curled on the rug, eyes, half-shut, ears pricking whenever the wind changed. Ruby sat across from him, her wool cloak folded neatly over the chair. Back, the soft scent of soap mingling with cedar from the tin box now resting on the shelf. Tonight, Gabriel said, palm on the worn arm of his father's chair, "I think it's time to open a room I've kept locked too long." He sat back, straight firelight, laying a gold stroke across the black string tie Ruby had knotted that morning. On the porch, the marks of his spurs still dotted the plank, two small circles of ink left by a man who'd come home on time. "That fight?" Ruby asked gently, like speaking to a patient waking from fever. Gabriel nodded. He glanced around the E&G table, the silver cross on the wall, the HG pocket knife on its hook. Everything had a home now. Only one memory still waited out on the sill, hoping to be called in. It was hot as a forge. Gabriel began. "I was 19, fresh off my first cattle drive. I told Pa, I'm going again. Wyoming, Texas, Kansas. Farther the better." He stood on the porch, hands smelling like saddle oil, and said, "This land's waiting on you, not the road." I snapped. Said Copper Creek was a chipped teacup. His face went purple, and he said the hardest thing he ever said, "If you go, don't come back." I slammed the door. Spurs hit the step 3 times. 3 days later, I came back, not because I missed home, but because the telegraph said pneumonia. I was late. Ruby didn't interrupt. She set both hands flat on the table, 2 silent banks so the river could run. I stood outside the door and listened to Ma read the Psalms. Gabriel said voice, gone rough. Before I could ask forgiveness, he was gone. 8 years after that, I kept walking, like shifting a fence post a little wrong every day. He laughed once, dry as old pine bark, then shook his head. At the memorial, I finally said, "I forgive you. Please forgive me. But tonight, I want to tell someone the moment just before the door slammed." He looked to Ruby for a nod. She gave one slow, as if tucking a strand of his memory behind his ear for him. "He was angry for my sake," Gabriel said carefully. I left for mine. The fire settled, then flared as if in agreement. Buddy stretched and laid her muzzle on the toe of his boot. Gabriel let out a long breath, the sound an old instrument makes when it finds the right string again. "Memory doesn't bite," Ruby said. "It bruises." "Let me take one side." She slid her chair closer, not touching his hand, just leaving a small space the words could step across. That afternoon, Gabriel said, looking into the fire like a window dust spun in the yard, "Hank brought new hinges. Pa was fixing the sagging barn door. I bragged about my first pay, and he didn't praise, just asked, 'You staying or going?' Heat rose in me. Ma set water down. "Drink first," she said. I pushed the cup. Water spread. Sunlight poured across the floor like liquid silver. Pa gripped my shoulders. Not hard, but heavy. "Out west," he said. "A man learns staying before he learns leaving." I knocked his hand away for the first and last time. I said the meanest thing I've ever said. "Stay like you till you die coughing in this cabin." Ruby closed her eyes for a beat, the way a doctor hears a rhythm fall out of time. Gabriel nodded. I stepped onto the porch spurs. Tack, tack, tack. I looked back and saw my father standing in his house, his shadow, his light, his place folded together. Ma said, "If you go, take your heart with you." I went and forgot it. I took the knife instead, for carving, for jerky, for cutting rope, never once to open a door I'd slammed. In Chicago, Ruby said chin on the back of her hand. Hazel eyes, dim bright. A night like that found me too. Before Jeremy died, I worked a surgery shift and forgot to eat. He brought soup. I snapped, "I'm saving lives, don't interrupt." He only said, "I just want to sit beside you." That night I sent him away. A week later, the flu took him. "We both sent away the ones who should have stayed," Gabriel murmured. Ruby nodded, her mouth unsteady. I paid high for that lesson. And I learned staying is a skill, not a reflex. I practiced by sitting with the dying going at their speed. She turned to him. "Tonight I'll sit by you." At your speed. Gabriel wrapped both work-scarred hands around the cool glass she'd set for him, like holding a late chance. "My father waited on my apology," he whispered. "I was late. I can't change that, but I can speak. So tomorrow, if my spurs tap on the porch, it'll be because I'm coming home, not walking out." "My turn," Ruby said, drawing her medical satchel near. She took out a pair of old leather gloves worn pale. Jeremy never broke these in. She managed a small, sad smile. He was a doctor, but liked catching babies better than cutting. During the epidemic, he didn't sleep. I kept other people's pulses, forgot my own. On the last day, he sat against the wall and said, "If the worst happens, don't stay in my room. Go out and work. Save someone. Care for someone. Love travels through hands." Her voice roughened. I stayed and still let him go. Not because I didn't love enough, because I didn't have enough hands. She smoothed the gloves. Leather whispered like a private hymn. I left Chicago for Copper Creek with a medicine chest and an empty heart. The first knock was Elizabeth. She didn't ask symptoms or preach. She brought breadcloth needles. "So," she said, "your hands will teach your heart." I stitched bandages, curtains, fenced tears. And one day, I noticed my heart keeping time again. Ruby met Gabriel's gaze without flinching. I have one fear starting, then losing. Opening the door and hearing a whistle pull someone away. Out in the dark, as if eavesdropping a whistle, drew one gentle note, sleepy as a bedtime breath. Ruby smiled at the coincidence. But Buddy tied a little bell to my life. That ting says here, "And now." She set Jeremy's gloves beside the Harris tintype. "I love your quiet, Gabriel," she said, "because in that quiet, things find their places, nails find their grooves, shoes fit their hooves. I love that you're shy to promise and steady to do. I'm afraid of losing, but I know if we weave tomorrow from small tasks, it will last." Her fingertips touched the E&G table. Durability is a Western kind of romance rarely bragged about, known by anyone who lives. Gabriel smiled, a soft one that seemed to brighten the cross half a shade. "If romance is what lasts," he said, "I want to make it day by day. There's a letter I wrote to my father." Gabriel added, standing to open a drawer. He brought out a yellowed page, bold strokes, the lurching lines of an angry boy. "I never sent it. I kept it to punish myself. But keeping anger is like keeping a snake in a chest, it'll bite." He set the letter on a steel plate and slid it into the stove. Ruby stood with him. She didn't ask him not to. She steadied his hand with her eyes. Paper curled. Flame took. Ink reddened. Blackened, turned to ash. Buddy lifted her head. The little tag chimed once like a notation. "Now for a nail." Ruby smiled, drawing a new round-headed spike from her bag. "I want one in the beam to tug you back whenever wind tries to shift you." Gabriel took the hammer, climbed a chair, and chose a spot above the E&G table just under the home plate he'd had stamped. 3 strokes, cack, 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 and the nail bit a muscle prayer instead of a spoken one. He hung his mother's key ring on it right at the house's center. "So every door knows its way open," he said. "And the knot." Ruby lifted a leftover strip of leather from Buddy's tag. "Figure 8, she reminded him, brow arched. Gabriel grinned, and they tied it together, one holding this end, the other that. "I'll keep the earth end," he said. "I'll keep the human end," she answered. The knot snugged down, neat, even gentle, where it should be tight, where it must a short lesson in marriage without a wedding. They sat. Fine rain ticked across the roof. Damp earth breathed in through the cracks. No whistle sounded now. Only the sleigh bell rustled at a draft. Gabriel set Jeremy's gloves in Ruby's hands. "Keep them here," he said. "When you're away, they'll look at me for you." Ruby laughed softly, tears warm but not stinging. "They're as particular as their first owner. We'll take turns, me and the gloves, watching over you." Taking turns? Gabriel echoed, finding the word as soft as one of his mother's quilts. He didn't ask to hold her. He stood near enough to hear her even breathing. When the rain thickened, he latched the window, stuffed a rag against the draft, and fed 2 more splits to the fire. Small things, done right, a waltz in the kitchen. After a rain-soaked night morning washed the prairie clean, the aspens shone so bright it was as if they made sound. The sleigh bell rang 2 notes for dawn. Buddy ran the porch line tin tag, ticking ting-ting, calling everything to begin. Gabriel brewed coffee. The bitter rose, straight up like a man standing after a long sleep. Ruby pushed the door open, chestnut hair wrapped in a scarf, cheeks pink from the wind. "The depot's receiving medical supplies today," she said. "Come with me." Gabriel nodded. They hitched Leonardo to the buggy and crossed flats streaked with silver puddles. The station lamps were lit. The horn gave one short neutral note, just the timetable talking. Station Master McKay rolled out a wooden crate stamped medical. Ruby signed the slip hand steady letters clean. Gabriel stood a little back, and for a flicker he saw Chicago in Ruby's eyes, then watched it dissolve into a Colorado morning. On the way home, they stopped at Miller's Creek. The water ran higher and leaf bells sang in chorus. Gabriel set the crate on the warm stone, where he'd carved a toy horse days ago. "Roll call for what stays," Ruby said, half tease, half right. Gabriel held up his fingers and counted. Roof doesn't leak. Trough is full. North fence is true. HG knife on its hook. Keys on the beam. Buddy's tag rings on time. Doorbell keeps the beat. Jeremy's gloves keep watch. Cedar tin has a home. And he looked at Ruby, the person beside me keeping my pace. Ruby smiled, eyes going bright in that tender place, not from hurt, but from being seen. As for me, she said, new patients will get their medicines. Father has a spare pair of hands. The town has a man who straightens fences. The forge has a helper, and I have someone who can count his own breaths. They ate cornbread Ruby had brought and drank Gabriel's coffee. Buddy lay between them, tag clicking lightly, like a heart settled to a calm beat. When the sun climbed over the aspens, Gabriel turned to Ruby. I won't promise anything grand, he said. I promise to stay and do the small things right. If ever I forget tug this knot. He tapped the figure eight they'd tied yesterday and smiled. Ruby set her palm on the knot and pressed once. I'll tug, she said, and if I'm afraid, you count for me. They let the sounds braid leaf bells, water the tiny chime at Buddy's throat. Small notes, fitting together into a short hymn two people could learn by heart. By noon, they were back at the cabin. Gabriel strung a drying tarp, built an extra shelf for Ruby's supplies, and fixed the bedroom window hinge. Ruby tallied dressings and needles, and the homes that needed visits. Each hammer tap, each line of ink landed where it belonged, a plain ceremony, and holy for that. Evening settled. They sat on the porch. A coyote sang one far note. The wind carried fresh pine smoke. The sleigh bell closed the day with a single chime. Buddy's tag answered with a smaller one. Gabriel turned, not asking, but saying, Ruby, our losses live in us. We don't drive them out. We give them a chair, and we sit in the other. Ruby nodded, smiling. And love fills the space between the chairs. They laced fingers without squeezing. Inside, the nail on the beam held the keys, glinting like a near star. On the porch, Gabriel's spurs didn't tap a leaving. They rested, waiting for tomorrow, when even going out would be another way of coming home. And right there in grass, rinsed by rain, they began again, by small things, by two hands, by a figure eight knot, easy to undo and hard to break. Part 8. The feeling of home night. Dew still salted the grass, and the smell of earth after last night's rain drifted into the kitchen through the door seam. The sleigh bell on the frame chimed a thin note. The coffee on the stove had just come to a boil. Gabriel poured 2 cups, rough palms, brushing warm glaze the crackle of dry wood, matching the house's even breath. Buddy stretched on the rug ears, flicking whenever a draft slid across the porch. On the plank wall, the tin plate stamped home glimmered softly in the oil lamp's halo, not dazzling, but bright enough to remind your back. Coffee, Gabriel said low, a little shy, like a man practicing the same morning invitation. Ruby stepped in cheeks, wind-rosy, the soft scent of soap arriving with the whisper of spur on porch plank. She hung her cloak, tied back her chestnut hair, and smiled. I'm early for Dr. Wilson's orders change the dressing on a stubborn patient and audit the supplies of a thrifty nurse. Every word she spoke tugged the kitchen closer, the way folks pull their chairs toward the fire. Gabriel brought out the cedar-lined tin he'd shelved yesterday and set it beside his mother's leather Bible. Today we'll open the attic trunk, add a shelf for your kit. And, he paused, I'm putting another nail on the porch. Pa had one. I want 2. He climbed a chair and drove a nail beside the old one. Cack, cack. The wood took the sound, the way a chest takes a new heartbeat. Done. He lifted his wide brim, and hung it on the first peg, then glanced at Ruby, a bit unsure. She understood, slipped off her light brown hat, and set it on the new nail. The doorbell chimed lightly, approving. They walked the yard. Leather and clean straw scented the young morning. Leonardo nickered soft breathing, white. Ruby unlatched the stall and counted a pulse under the horse's jaw, the reflex of a nurse who never leaves her craft. Gabriel split a sack of grain, letting each scoop fall into the trough like words sown into soil. "I'm planting a run of irises along the fence," Ruby said. "Something sweet for summer, without the bugs." And I, Gabriel, patted the gate post. "We'll hang a little bell for Buddy by the garden corner. So when I'm off in the pasture, I'll know someone's here." The sun lifted the grass and gilded the dirt on their boots. Inside, the bedroom window, he'd rehung last night, opened and shut like an easy breath. On the stove, yesterday's pot of corn, porridge warm steam, scented with cinnamon, the comfort of a story that doesn't need telling. Gabriel looked down the room. The E and G table, the HG pocket knife, the father and son tintype on the shelf, everything with a home. Then he looked at the new nail wearing Ruby's hat. This house now held more than things, it held two people. "That's enough for one morning," Ruby said, sipping enough to be home. Gabriel nodded. For the first time, the words "be home" didn't itch his heels. They set his spurs down with one small, satisfying tack. By noon, the front yard was lively. Hank Peterson brought a hammer, Mrs. Lawson a pie, Tom Fletcher a rattling bag of hinges, and a handful of Seedtown men shouldered planks. Coop for Ruby Hank rasped, so the nurse has fresh eggs to bully her patients with porridge. Pastor Mills came too, arms full of neatly bound hay. Far off, a train let out one measured note, tamping the city back at the end of the rails and leaving this country free for tasks small enough to turn holy. Gabriel passed around a simple sketch he'd drawn the night before. Wind flipped the paper. They split up. Hank and Tom raised the frame. Gabriel cut boards. Ruby ran the drill, and Buddy kept the garden corner, her tin tag chiming whenever someone called her name. Hammers rang. New pine opened its clean smell, and the home plate caught a little more light. A colt in the next stall, spooked at the pounding, snorted, backed into the wall, white showing around his eyes. Ruby set the drill down and moved quiet, draping her shawl lightly across his eyes. Fingertips finding the ridge of his nose, her murmur a lullaby, "Easy now." Leonardo answered with a low nicker. The colt loosened. Pastor Mills watched and nodded. Sometimes faith is nothing more than the right cloth in the right place. Gabriel met Ruby's eyes over the shawl. They both knew a house needs more than timber and nails. Someone has to know how to lay a covering over fear. Mid-afternoon turned hot. Sweat salted his temples like a sea he'd never seen. Mrs. Lawson handed out lemonade, thin lemon slices, throwing sunlight against the glass. To Elizabeth, she said, eyes damp, "She used to sit on this porch mending my boy's shirt." Pastor added, "And to the hands mending today." The dry clink of cups met the porch post like a handsaw catching perfect grain, brief, honest, satisfying. By sundown, the coop stood square, the roof set true, feed troughs hung where Ruby could reach. Hank passed Gabriel the hammer, set the last nail sun. Gabriel drove it once. The plank took it in exactly the right spot, like a heart-finding rhythm after a stutter. Buddy barked once. Her tag tinged in reply, 2 punctuation marks agreeing. Work closed, they circled the E&G table. Apple pie, cornbread, and steaming beans. Ruby poured coffee, passing cups as if handing around thanks. Pastor laid a hand to the beam and prayed short, "Teach this roof, to wait this door, to open this table to share so no one who comes here eats alone." In the amen, Gabriel looked around. Old friends, new faces, cinnamon lifting from Mrs. Lawson's pie. The figure 8 knot they tied yesterday, glinting on its hook like a smile. He felt grateful to witness the day folks began to call the Harris place by a community's name. The next afternoon, a creek breeze climbed the slope, carrying water aspen and soft, wet grass. Gabriel planed the last board for a porch swing. Buddy lay underneath, sniffing the curls of shavings like they were fresh bread. Ruby brought a teapot out and set it on the table with one of Elizabeth's lace cloths. "Remember the chain mounts?" she asked. "I do." Gabriel shrugged. "But you'll make me test it 3 times for the right cadence." He slipped the hooks, load tested. The swing gave one long creak and then accepted the weight of 2 like a log taking flame. They sat. The porch moved gently. The doorbell chimed to the slow beat of the chain. Gabriel pulled an old harmonica from the drawer, a scrap of memory that had crossed many borders seldom played. He breathed a simple waltz. The wind put a western color in it, wide, but not sad. Ruby leaned her head back on the slat eyes, half-closed fingers smoothing the cloth on her lap. "That's a house heartbeat," she murmured, half asleep. When the tune ended, the swing still rocked. Buddy shifted and yawned long. Her tag tapped the wood with a late bright note. Gabriel slipped his coat over Ruby's knees, his hand brushing the resin-stained knuckles that had stitched strangers and now rested on her own porch. He looked out across the grass, the north fence tight as a pledge. The coop door half closed like a watchman off duty. The sun's shadow climbed the roof. 2 robins lit on the clothesline teetered, and the teapot's lid ticked. Far off, the rails ran silver under evening, the whistle saying nothing. Gabriel thought of the twin porch nails, and calm came like a man who finally knows where to hang the gun he no longer reaches for. "Ruby," he whispered sleep. Her smile tilted without opening her eyes. "I already am." He didn't say he was 2, though he hadn't slept this way in years, without leaning on iron wheels. The swing carried them through quiet measures, a waltz, with no lead, only company. That night, a front rolled in from the northeast. Clouds bunched like an unherded herd. Wind whipped the new iris, rain hammered the roof like a smith on an anvil. The bell rattled long, the door groaned. Gabriel grabbed his coat shoved into his boots and took the storm lantern. "Stay inside," he told Ruby. She shook her head, already lighting a second lantern skirt. Hem-tucked Buddy, weaving at their legs. Tag, ting-ting like a metronome. Rain slashed sideways. A leak opened over the stove. "I'll hold the ladder," Ruby said in that clipped operating room voice. Gabriel climbed board, and nails under his arm, the hammer in his belt. Wind shoved Ruby's lantern, swung its gold, dragging his shadow long across the roof. "Count," she called when a gust hit. 1, 2, 3 drive. The hammer bit true cack-cack, tie the line. She tossed up a figure 8 they'd practiced. He cinched at the rope, hugging the post like a vow that knew when to let go. Below, Buddy growled toward the brush, then quieted at their call. Rain flogged the shingles, but the leak gave up. Gabriel slid down. His knee met the wet ground, the cold, honest feel of earth. They stowed the ladder and backed into the kitchen. The fire woke again. Ruby combed rain from her hair. Gabriel handed a towel. "I hate drips," she said, laughing the air out. "Same in a ward, the little holes always find you." "Lucky we know a patcher," he answered, voice eased like rain letting up. They sat. Ruby's bean soup simmered to small bubbles. Steam turned the window's leftover rain to soft glass. A far whistle drew a gentle line, the messenger of night passing by, not calling anyone out into it. Gabriel Ruby set her spoon down, hazel eyes steadying tomorrow. "I want to speak to my father. Not for permission, for news. I've chosen a road. That road runs past your door?" She paused, swallowed once, as if pushing all the rain from her lungs. "I'm not moving in right away, the town will talk. But I want my things to live in this house, a medicine shelf, a broken needle in the cup, a green towel on the back door hook. So when I work a night shift, the house still remembers my scent." Gabriel sat up palm on the E and G table, the way you'd set it on your own heart. "Tomorrow, I'll go to Dr. Wilson. I'll say, I mean to court you less with words than with work. I'll build out the little attic room as a temporary dispensary, set a trellis for your irises and—" He looked up at the beam where the keys hung bright. "I'll cut you your own key." Ruby's smile shone tears warm, with the feeling of seeing the future with your hands. "Cut it," she said, "and keep it. When my father says, 'It's time,' you'll place it in my palm." Outside, the rain eased. The doorbell settled. Buddy's tag tinged once like a seal. Sunday morning Copper Creek wore a film of mist. On the clinic steps, Dr. Wilson stood, with a teacup, kind eyes keen from a life of comings and goings. Gabriel took off his hat. His spur struck wood with one clean tack, like a knuckle on a heart. "Doctor," he began, "I've come to say what I should have said sooner. I'm asking leave to court Ruby properly. I'm not good at grand promises. I am good at staying." The doctor looked straight through him long enough to see that beneath the trail blanket was a back that knew how to bend in the right places. He sipped, set the cup down. "I love my daughter by letting her do the work she chooses," he said. "If you love her, you won't win or lose against the railroad or the range. You'll share them. You have two hands. Give one to others and keep the other for your own house. Can you do that?" "I can," Gabriel answered without hurry. "I've been practicing mending neighbors' fences before my own. It feels lighter, not less." The doctor smiled. The fan lines by his eyes cut deep like irrigation through a field. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small, worn key, and placed it in Gabriel's palm. "To the attic dispensary, we built it yesterday. I went to look. It's humble, but clean. Keep it. When you two are ready, let this become a bedroom key. But remember, change it by right, not by haste." Ruby appeared in the doorway, face bright, simple brown dress. "You two trading responsibilities already," she teased. "Only some," her father winked. "The worry part." Ruby turned to Gabriel. "And the staying part, did you do it?" Gabriel lifted the key, then closed his hand around it. "I'll keep it, like we said last night. When your father says the word, I'll place it in yours." They walked the street past the saloon, where spur-on plank sounds different when the heart is steadier. The depot was quiet, the twin rails shining like a creek not yet awake. They swung by the church and lit a candle beneath the stained glass. For Elizabeth, Ruby whispered. And for Jeremy, Gabriel answered, letting the names sit side by side, neither one making the other less just two nearby stars. That evening on the porch, Gabriel filed the new key on the stone buddy, on guard her tag, tinging to his rhythm. Ruby hung a green towel on the back door, hook a little cloth period. They slid the medicine shelf into the kitchen corner and noted in the ledger, gauze enough, cinnamon enough, new nails enough, cilantro planted, honey-colored dusk wrapped the porch. The doorbell chimed 2 last notes, and the house answered with the swing's whisper and a sigh that belonged to them both. Ruby Gabriel said, eyes on the home plate. I don't go to escape staying anymore. I stay so I know how to go home. If the world asks me where home is, he turned to her. It's wherever you hang that hat. Ruby smiled and touched the new nail. And if the world asks me what ease is, she said, I'll point to this swing, that Bell Buddies tag, and your hand in the right place. They laced their fingers, not tight enough to know if they let go, they could find each other again. On the far hill, aspen flashed like coins in an old magician's sleeve. Here, after all these years, Gabriel finally understood home isn't 4 walls and a roof. It's the place the little bell calls you back to, where the person you've chosen to stay with hangs her hat, where small work done steady makes love last. And that night, when he breathed a short waltz by the stove, Buddy lay flat and tinged a single note. Ruby rested her head on his shoulder, and all 3 could hear the house's heart, calm, deep, and beating in the rhythm of staying. Part 9. A new life, a new beginning. The white wooden church of Copper Creek wasn't singing hymns tonight. It breathed beeswax pine smoke and the creak of benches at a town meeting. At the front, Pastor Mills tapped a ruler 3 times. Our school is cramped and leaking. Winter's close, and those little ones sit with wind slicing through like knives. Miss Porter, the new teacher, with her hair pinned high, hugged the gradebook eyes wet as she described kids rotating seats to huddle near the coal stove. At the window, a far-off train pulled one long note drawing a line between leaving and staying. Hank Peterson, the blacksmith, rose. I'll bring hammer and anvil. Mrs. Lawson lifted a hand. I'll bring pies to feed the crew. McKay, the station master, promised discounted lumber freight if the whole town pitched in. While folks weighed the details, Gabriel stood and set his hat on the bench, a man putting his heart into his words. I'll bring hands and days, he said. I've roamed long enough to know a house made of words still needs nails and posts. My mother used to say, every child deserves a story. I want to raise a place where stories won't be rained out. From the back row, old Greeley, the West Range grazier, grumbled, with what money? Tom Fletcher leaned on his cane and rasped, I'll bring boards. You bring your mouth, that'll be plenty. Laughter loosened the room. Dr. Wilson stood voice, even and kind. I'll stock a field kit for the site and give my Sundays to patch skin knees for free. Ruby drew her cloak close. I'll set up a nurse's station and give tetanus shots if needed. I'll keep the medicine ledger like a lesson book. Miss Porter unrolled a sheet of drafting paper, a one-room plan, south-facing, to soften winter winds, windows east and west, for light the stove in the northwest corner. Gabriel bent over it, murmuring, sill, 6x9 joists, 2 6-corner posts, 4x4, 45-degree pitch to shed snow, rammed clay floor with straw. Numbers he'd once dodged now sounded gentle as a horse chewing hay. Buddy whined softly at the door. The tin tag on her collar tinged a single note through the crack. When Pastor set a thank-offering hat in the aisle, hands dropped coins, nails, bits of wire screws, even an apple. Greeley hesitated, then slipped in a silver dollar. "For my grandson," he muttered, dodging eyes. Gabriel lifted the hat and felt weight of money, yes, but more of trust. "Tomorrow at first light," he said, "we meet the train for lumber. I'll bring rope, the folding knife, and the promise to stay." A low, honest amen spread down the pews, like fire across damp prairie, hot yet safe. Dawn thinned like blotting paper, the rails shining a pencil silver line. Gabriel, Hank, Tom, and McKay slid boards off the flat car. Spurs ticked on planks. Chains and nails clinked a work song older than any of them. Buddy circled, tinging now and then, handing out rhythm. "Mind Miller's Creek?" McKay warned. Last week's rain scoured the planks on the low bridge. At the creek, water ran high mud, bit the wagon wheels. "Turn back," Tom called. Hank frowned. Gabriel threaded a rope through the wagon, tossed it across, and hitched it to a live oak post. He pounded in on the far bank. He tied a figure 8, the knot his mother taught, tight yet easy to free, then nodded at Hank. "You take the pulley. I'll lead." Leonardo pricked his ears, took the breast line, and stepped into the shingle. Buddy swam a clean arc, scrambled up the bare bank. Her tag, ting-ting, like a little bell, pointing the way. 1, 2, 3. Hank barked. The pulley turned, the wagon inched. Wheels slipped, then found gravel. "Hold cadence," Tom cried. Gabriel shoved, Leonardo leaned, and the wagon climbed the far shelf like a held breath breaking free. McKay slapped the post. "All right, you stubborn cuss." He laughed, mustache jostling like grass in a gust. A small boy, Nico, Mrs. Gonzalez's son, stood wide-eyed on the bank. "Mister, can I do that?" Gabriel knelt and ruffled the boy's hair dust, lighting a halo around it. "Someday I'll teach you knots. For now you count." Nico raised a solemn hand and counted 1, 2, 3. A small voice doing big work, the heartbeat of the crew. At noon they stopped at the saloon. The floor pinged with sharp spur notes. May set out lemonade. "For the school crew," she said, eyes sliding to the tip jar. She lifted a few coins and dropped them into the offering hat on the bar. "Kids buying candy after school won't hurt my trade either." The room laughed, the sound of a town learning to invest with its hands. By late day, the lumber wagon hummed homeward. Wind combed the silver tops of grass. Red dust drifted low, the road running long, as a lesson said, until it sticks. Ruby waited by the north fence, brown dress, neat medical satchel on her arm. She ran a finger along the figure 8 knot Gabriel had just undone and smiled. "Good knot." Gabriel nodded. In the HG pocket knife lay a warm oil smell like his father's palm. In the rope, his mother's fingerprints. In the load of lumber, the held-back tears of both traded out for sweat, the fairest bargain in the West. Saturday broke green as a greeting. Pastor crossed himself. Miss Porter pinned her hair tight. Mrs. Lawson set out pies. May brought beans, and the children flitted like sparrows. Today, Pastor said, "We lift the frame, so tomorrow words have a roof." Buddy patrolled the edged tin tag, tinging steady as hammer beats. "Joists," Gabriel called. Hank took one end, Tom set the mortise. Hammers sang. Fresh pine thickened in the mouth. Corner posts rose, true cross braces bit deep the frame like the rib cage of a healthy horse. A hand lift swung the roof truss up. The wind, seeing a chance, teased truss bobbling. A little girl, Lena chased a butterfly into danger. "Stop!" Miss Porter cried. No time to think. Gabriel lunged, scooped her clear. The truss dropped on his shoulder. White pain struck sparks behind his eyes. He clenched his jaw and held while Hank and Tom muscled in. Count Hank growled. 1, 2, 3. The truss seated. Ruby was there in a breath, fingers checking clavicle, tearing a strip from her own skirt to make a sling. Not broken, she judged. But you swing the hammer with the other hand. Gabriel exhaled and grinned at Lena, now hiccuping tears. "Hey, kid, butterflies need a school to learn to fly." They ate on laid planks. Miss Porter read a line from McGuffey kind. Words cost little and accomplish much. Pastor added, "And a nail's a penny, yet it can hold a whole roof." Buddy rested her head on Gabriel's hat, eyes half closed. The sentinel choosing a calm spot to watch love at work. By afternoon, the siding went up, window frames set. The children pressed handprints into the wet threshold, clay flowers made of earth. Shoulder throbbing, Gabriel lifted a small bell Hank had forged from a worn horseshoe. He hung it under the eave. It chimed a bright trial note, the first sound of tomorrow. Ruby looked at him, hazel eyes glassed with rain not yet fallen. "You shouldered a truss, Gabriel." He shook his head. "The town did. I was just one back in a herd of backs. And that back would ache tonight, a good kind of ache, lightening many hearts by morning." Sunday dawn, smoke rose, brown from the western slope. Wind turned and a prairie fire licked the town's edge. Miss Porter clutched her chalk box eyes wide. Pastor rang the church bell. Long strokes calling everybody to the rhythm. Greeley, hands shaky from last night's bottle, grabbed a shovel. "I'll set backfires." Gabriel pointed. "We cut a fire break along the road, burn a counterline with straw torches. Women haul wet cloth. Children go with Mrs. Lawson to the church. Ruby ran the aid post. Buddy scouted ahead, her tag tinging every 10 paces like a guide mark. Hank soaked gunny sacks and whipped the flames, the SSS of steam, like the sigh of fire surrendering. Gabriel and Greeley laid a counterburn flame, met flame, and died at the line of bare dirt. The wind paused, then blessed them, shifted sweeping heat across the open, sparing the new school frame. A stray tongue of fire pitched embers onto the papered roof. Tom leapt and slipped. Gabriel followed, sling biting, shoulder blazing. But he caught the wet sack Ruby threw and beat. Miss Porter linked arms with the women, stamping out sparks in soaked shoes, laughing and crying at once. "I haven't taught yet, and I've already learned a lesson." Pastor prayed, short. "Turn the wind, Lord, like the heart that knows how." 15 minutes stretched to 15 seasons. Smoke backed off. Fire lay down. The far pasture charred black as ink on a turned page. The town held its breath and cheered. The school stood. Greeley dropped to a sit and wept soundlessly. He looked at Gabriel through soot. "I kept it. For the boy." Gabriel pulled him up and wrapped an arm around him. "You kept it for all of us." Ruby wiped a clean cross on Gabriel's brow with her thumb. "You ran toward the fire to save a roof," she whispered. "First time I've seen you run the right way." By afternoon, Hank's forge rang again. Hooks and nails like the town's heart, resetting its beat. On the beam, the bell Gabriel had hung chimed a single clear note, sweeping out leftover fear. Children waved from the church doorway. Buddy wagged. Her tag answered in the little language that says done. Morning opened like a fresh page. Aspens clapped with a green sound only children can fully hear. Miss Porter stacked slates, chalk, and brushes. Pastor Mills read a single line, "Wisdom enters by the small door named letters." Hank polished the bell. Mrs. Lawson set cornbread. Ruby checked a scrape on Nico's hand and sealed it like sealing up belief. Gabriel came a beat late, not for laziness, but because he'd stopped at the cabin to wrap his father's old books in Elizabeth's lace Pilgrim's Progress, a McGuffey reader, a rim-worn Psalter, and a loose-backed Robinson Crusoe. He slid the Harris Library onto a new shelf. Miss Porter touched the spine's lips, shaping thank you without sound. "Say a word," Pastor invited. Gabriel removed his hat and held it to his chest. "Friends?" He began, eyes finding the children first. "I used to think freedom was leaving. Turns out it's also staying to build a place where anyone can start out their way." My mother whispered, "Every child deserves a story." So here it is, a room where stories can live, where the rain can listen, where the wind can read and calm down. He lifted the HG knife and grinned. "Don't worry, I'm not carving the desks. Just one line under the beam." He climbed a chair, took the punch Hank handed him, and pressed 4 words, "Stay and study deep, need an iron sermon." The horseshoe bell rang 3 times. Children poured in. Lena the butterfly chaser took the front row. Nico stood guard at the door like a small sentry. "Page 1, Miss Porter said. Ruby watched from the window, hazel eyes bright enough to make the glass want to mirror back. Buddy settled on the stoop chin on Gabriel's hat. Her tag tinged along with the cadence of early readers, like the new school finding its pulse. At noon, the smell of chalk cornbread and new wood drifted all the way to the north fence, where Gabriel was finishing one last stretch. He set the hammer down and glanced up through the open door. He saw Miss Porter pointing as the children sounded out the word home. Home, from the tin plate in the cabin to the word in their mouths, traveled from his chest to their voices as easily as wind walks down from the hills. Ruby arrived with 2 tin cups of coffee. They perched on a fence post and watched the roof shine in the sun. "Feels like a beginning," she said softly. "Not just yours?" Gabriel nodded. "Copper Creek's." He studied his hands, black nail heads, fine knife scrapes, the ordinary marks that made a morning big enough to be written only in the heart. Far off, the train gave a gentle note as if congratulating. Nearer, the school bell answered 3 times each ring, falling into the grass like seed. Toward evening, after the first lesson let out, Miss Porter led the children to plant a run of irises along the eave. Ruby setting stakes, Gabriel tying lines, the figure 8 repeating durable as a promise. Mr. Lena asked, "When we're done learning, can I fly?" Gabriel smiled and snugged the final knot. "You can. Just remember to land and tell the little ones your stories." Sunlight sifted through leaves, brightening the prairie like a polished bell. Buddy loped a circle tag steady. The school bell rested under the eave, waiting for dawn. Copper Creek exhaled a town held together by nails, rope, sweat, and a wooden room where stories would keep living and grow, so journeys could begin without getting lost. Gabriel squeezed Ruby's hand, and in that calm, he heard it plain staying is also a way of setting out. Part 10, The Last Homecoming. Spring tuned its green keys across Copper Creek like someone had reset the piano after a long winter. Prairie wind moved through the aspens until their leaf bells hummed. The grass smelled of sweet milk. Miller's Creek swelled water, sliding silver ribbons under the sun. On the Harris porch, the horse bell gave a soft ting the wake-up note for a promised day. Buddy ran her patrol back and forth, the tin tag on her collar, ting-tinging in an even rhythm, checking every corner of the yard like a small, earnest sentry. Gabriel was raising a wooden arbor behind the house beside the row of irises Ruby had planted last season. The hammer ticked. Nails set home with an easy, satisfying bite. The HG pocket knife flashed a gentle stripe of light. On the beeswax-polished E&G table, he placed the watch with his mother's picture inside the gift Ruby once gave him, setting Elizabeth's kind gaze over the day's small ceremony. "Mama," he murmured, "I'm borrowing your yard to welcome someone new." Mrs. Lawson bustled up first her flowered dress, as busy as a hive. Apple pies done meringue whipped smooth as a cloud. Those young'uns will wipe the plate. Hank Peterson lugged in a bell he'd forged from an old horseshoe. Hang it on the arbor, so when the little one cries, the bell can hush her. Pastor Mills carried a bundle of evergreen for steadfastness. Miss Porter arrived with a flock of children holding fistfuls of wildflowers. For Miss Ruby, they chirped, and the baby Ruby stood hands to hips, tea-colored smock, tied neat chestnut hair, pinned with a silver clip. Her belly rose round and lovely as a small grass hill. She checked the clinic, chest moved out to the porch, laying out bandaged needle inhaler, her motions soft and sure. Dr. Wilson kept half a step back, rubbing his silvered beard eyes, appraising his daughter the way a senior physician sizes up a good colleague. No surgery today. He smiled, just a little service to mark the months you two carried together. But you know life, she likes a surprise. New pine scented the breeze from the arbor. Far down the valley, the train gave a mild, courteous note, the kind that lets travelers go without jarring those who are staying. Leonardo poked his head from the stall and offered a soft wicker. "Well, Mr. Harris Hank teased you fixing to make a speech before the vows." Gabriel flushed at the ears. He looked around at the E&G table, the home tin plate, the Horsebell Buddies tag, the iris trellis, each one a word, in the long sentence he'd been writing with his hands all these months. "I only know how to do small things right," he said. "The big words can come by themselves." Little girls clipped lace to the arbor. Miss Porter straightened ribbons. "Copper Creek in her Sunday dress," Pastor joked. Ruby's work-roughened fingers touched Gabriel's brief enough, like cinching their usual figure-8 knot, easy to loosen when needed, hard to break when the wind leans in. By noon, a thin veil of cloud cooled the air. The whole town had gathered. Greeley fumbled with a tie. May from the saloon carried lemonade. Tom Fletcher set extra bench planks. Buddy checked every pair of boots. Her tag tinged as if stamping attendance. Pastor lifted a hand to pray, just as Ruby swayed, and caught the arbor post. Ruby Gabriel swept off his hat. His spur kissed the porch with a small sound that somehow filled his chest. Ruby drew a long breath, then smiled. "Seems our guest of honor wants to arrive early." Dr. Wilson was already beside her, calm as creek gravel. "All right, warm water, clean linens." Gabriel shuttered the windward window. Hank set a kettle to boil. May wiped the table with spirits. Miss Porter keep the children singing quietly. Everyone moved to their marks like an old orchestra, sliding into a familiar score. Only this time the conductor was Ruby's round belly. Rain began to stipple the porch notes tapping the roof. Inside, the stove glowed. Mrs. Lawson's pie scented the room with cinnamon, mixing with soap and new wood. Ruby bit her lip, sweat beading. Gabriel's calloused hand reached steady, not shaking. "I'm here," he said, the way he always did, few words enough weight. Dr. Wilson counted the pulse and soothed. "You're stronger than I ever was that winter hemorrhage season. Now breathe, Count, breathe." Ruby laughed between pangs. "You always bring case histories to scare me straight." Pain rose like wind through irises. Ruby clamped Gabriel's hand until it burned, and he shifted so she could lean his back a post. Outside, the horse bell sounded once. Buddy whined low the watch call of the loyal. Pastor sat by the door and read the shortest psalms, so the words would not crowd the labor. Mrs. Lawson murmured, "When your Mama Gabriel helped bring my boy, she didn't tremble. You stand like her same way of being." Then the gate opened a cry as fine as a gold thread snapping swelling until it filled the house like spring rain fills a pond. Dr. Wilson's smile went young again. A girl. He wrapped her in white and laid that small life on Ruby's chest. Gabriel, trail-hardened and fire-tested, felt tears rise clean and helpless. "Welcome home, daughter." The rain eased. The bell Ruby had hung on the arbor chimed 3 clear notes as if answering that first cry. Buddy rested her head on Gabriel's hat. Her tag tinged a period at the end of a prayer that had just been granted. On the porch, folks laughed and wept together. Copper Creek had one more reason to stay. Evening poured honey over the aspens. Post-storm clouds lay like white horses about to doze. The town formed a circle under the iris arbor. Ruby stepped onto the porch, tired, flushed, but bright to the bottom of her gaze. The baby asleep in Elizabeth's lace. Dr. Wilson stood near hands faint with the discipline and mercy smell of chloroform. "Her name?" Pastor asked gently. Gabriel wetted his lips and glanced at the open-faced watch, his mother's smile lit at the point of a blade. "Friends," he said low and clear, "our daughter's name is Eliza Grace. Eliza, to remember Elizabeth, who taught me to stay by doing the small things. Grace for what we owe to the Lord and to this town." Ruby touched their daughter's cheek and whispered, "Welcome, Eliza Grace Harris." Pastor brushed the baby's brow with the evergreen. "May you grow under the shade of people who know how to wait and among the voices of those who do much and say little." Hank rang the horseshoe bell 3 times. Miss Porter led the children through the letter H. Homeheart Harris. Greeley, the old rawhide, awkwardly pulled a silver dollar wrapped in oiled paper from his pocket and set it in the cradle. For books, he mumbled, "Last time I brought fire. This time I'd like to bring words." Gabriel carried the child round the circle. May tapped the tiny palm and sniffed. "Strong little nails, she'll be quick at my till someday." Laughter rose soft as tallow on a squeaky hinge. Buddy nosed the cradle tinged once, then quieted, accepting the new packmate. Leonardo answered from the stall with a deep whicker. The horses amen. "Now for promises," Pastor said. Gabriel turned to Ruby. No rings needed. They had a knife, rope nails, and a porch swing. "I promise to stay and do the daily small things. Pump water, mend, fence, cook porridge, When she's fevered, he said. And I, Ruby added, promise to walk beside you, out on the range, and step ahead when it's time to light a backfire. Pastor's beard smiled. 2 Western vows, durable as a post sunk deep. In the soft wind, Eliza whimpered once, then settled when Ruby gathered her close. You belong, Gabriel whispered, as if speaking to the young man he'd been 8 years ago, handing back the sleep he'd lost. Lamplight showed across the yard. The long table filled pies like little fire's beans, steaming cornbread gold as hay. May poured cider. Mrs. Gonzalez brought hot tamales. The arbor bell chimed whenever the breeze remembered an easy invitation. Miss Porter and the children sang their letters. Buddy threaded underfoot her tag-keeping time. Hank lifted his fiddle, Gabriel his harmonica. They called up a slow waltz. Ruby rose and set her hand on his shoulder. His spurs rasped the boards, an old signal to begin. They turned in quiet circles. Wind moved through Ruby's hair. Iris scent clung to her dress. Pastor whistled soft. Children giggled. You dance too well for a man who just drives nails, Ruby teased. Gabriel shrugged. My mother said a Western man should know how to lead on the floor and in life. When the music paused, Gabriel walked alone to the knoll behind the garden, where 2 graves watched the valley. Spring grass was plush. Fireflies hung like small remarks from those gone on. Gabriel set the watch on Elizabeth's stone and opened it so the photograph could drink a little moon. Mama, I kept your word, I stayed. I traded remorse for work. I nailed home to the wall. I set stay and study and iron under the school beam. Today I put my hand on a small new head. Wind lifted a corner of lace, an old hand smoothing her boy's hair. He turned to his father's stone and stood a long time. Pa, his voice broke and held. I came late that day, but now I'm the one who shows up early to my girl's first touch, early to the town's fire line, early to the school bell. Let me stand beside you with the stance of a man who keeps a roof. Below the knoll, Ruby held Eliza and looked up. Her eyes were warm as a lamplight. Buddy curled by the oak. Her tag tinged a loyal creature's ascent. Back on the porch, Gabriel took a short strip of leather, tied a figure 8, and fixed it to the baby's cradle. This knot remembers your grandparents, he said. Soft where soft is needed. Firm where firm is needed. Ruby laid a finger on the knot and pressed 2 quiet clicks as chance and choice fit snugly together. When the guests had gone, the horse bell hummed 2 long notes. The yard held the soft embers of spent fire. Buddy kept watch on the steps ears toward a far coyote. Inside the hearth sank to warm ash. Ruby tucked Eliza into her basket and spread a thin wool blanket. The baby snuffled, then drifted like a drop of honey, disappearing into tea sweet without a fuss. Gabriel sat the porch swing, the harmonica resting in his palm. Ruby brought 2 mugs of ginger tea and sat close, shoulder to shoulder. Tomorrow, I'm riding the north stretch, she said softly. Taking cough syrup to Mrs. Gonzalez. You mind the east fence, Greeley's cattle are testing it again. Gabriel nodded, smiling. I'll have Hank stamp some new hooks. At noon, I'll swing by the school and hear Miss Porter teach the letter G Grace. So when Eliza walks in one day, she won't fear the word in her own name. They fell quiet, listening to the prairie breathe. Somewhere a train drew a silver line across the night, and went still tomorrow would have its journeys. Tonight's staying was enough. Buddy shifted. her tag tinged marking a fourth secret measure in the home waltz. The arbor bell gave the faintest ring, as if the wind knew a baby was sleeping and minded its manners. "Are you still afraid?" Ruby asked, laying her head to his shoulder. Gabriel thought a moment, looked toward the school roof, green-black in the dark, toward the dim hill of graves, toward the double hook on the porch, holding two hats. "I still remember," he said, "but I'm not afraid. I remember, so I'll keep. I'm unafraid, so I can give." Ruby smiled in the dark, a warmth so steady the wind itself seemed to relax. He lifted Eliza for a moment, cheek to cheek, the smallest warmth proving the holiest truths. An ex-drifter stood counting his child's breaths. He laid her down, pulled the blanket smooth, and leaned his brow to Ruby's. Tired just enough to be happy. Before they shut the door, Gabriel looked over the room. The E&G table, the watch with his mother's face, the HG knife, the home tin, the figure 8 on the cradle, the key ring on the beam, each a small star pointing true. His palm rested on the door frame, wood warm like a horse after work. "Mama," he said inside, "I came back." And I stayed. They doused the lamps. The horse bell tinged once punctuation at the end of a long chapter. To the east, a strand of pale thread opened the sky hint of dawn. Gabriel took Ruby's hand. His spurs lay quiet on the boards. No need to strike today. He smiled and said the few words a house remembers forever. "I found my home." Twilight settled over Copper Creek, the last sun drawing a band of fire along the ridge. The Harris place was no longer a dust-caught ruin, but a warm roof, humming with a child's laugh, the smell of baking, and a horse bell singing in the evening wind. Gabriel stood on the porch, his spur ticking an easy beat on the plank's eyes, on Ruby cradling their child beside the iris row. Her smile caught the day's last light, and in that small moment, he knew every long mile, every scar, every lost year had led him back to the right place. He stepped down and wrapped them both in his arms. His voice was rough, but sure. "I rode too far to learn this, but I finally found home." Ruby looked up, eyes shimmering. "And I was here waiting," she whispered, "between love and the everyday things." For a few seconds, everything stilled, only the braided rhythms of their hearts, the soft palm of prairie wind, and a simple, marrow-deep confession. A once-lost cowboy had found a reason to stay, to live, and to love. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from outrunning the past. It comes from accepting it, forgiving yourself, and building tomorrow with the ones you love. Have you found your true home yet? If you were in the cowboy's boots, would you stay to protect the town? Or ride off into the wild? Tell me in the comments.